I stood frozen in the doorway of the psychiatric evaluation room watching my parents hand falsified medical documents to the new psychiatrist. My mother's voice dripped with fake concern as she declared I'd been committed before for paranoid delusions. My father nodded solemnly, adding details about my supposed violent episodes. They needed me declared incompetent before my grandmother's trust fund matured next month. $20 million makes people do terrible things. But when Dr. Harrison looked up with that strange smile, everything changed. The morning air felt thick with betrayal as I pressed myself against the cold wall outside Dr. Harrison's office, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. My hands trembled as I gripped my phone, desperate to record something, anything that would prove what my parents were attempting. But the door had already closed, muffling their voices to indistinct murmurs. 3 weeks. That's all the time I had left before my 29th birthday before Grandmother Eleanor's trust fund would finally release into my control. $20 million that she'd carefully protected, ensuring it would skip my parents' generation entirely and come directly to me. She'd seen something in them that I'd been too blind to recognize until now. I forced myself to walk calmly to my car, though every instinct screamed at me to run. My mind raced through the past few months searching for signs I'd missed. The concerned looks my mother Catherine had been giving me at family dinners, the way my father Robert had started asking about my sleep patterns, my work stress, whether I'd been feeling overwhelmed. Once safely in my vehicle, I called my best friend Sarah, my voice barely steady. "They're trying to have me committed. My parents are actually trying to steal grandmother's money by having me declared mentally incompetent." Sarah's sharp intake of breath echoed through the speaker. "Esther, slow down. What are you talking about?" I explained what I'd seen, the forged papers, the lies about previous commitments to a place called Willowbrook Psychiatric Facility. As I spoke, pieces began clicking into place. The family gathering last month, where I'd felt unusually dizzy after drinking coffee my mother had prepared. The concerned whispers between my aunts after I'd had to excuse myself. The way my father had rushed to steady me loudly, announcing to everyone that I'd been having these episodes frequently. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. "Esther, last week your mother called me. She said she was worried about you, asked if I'd noticed any strange behavior. I told her you seemed fine, but she kept pressing, wanting to know if you'd said anything paranoid or suspicious." My blood ran cold. How long had they been laying this groundwork? How many people had they been planting seeds of doubt with? I drove home in a haze, my mind struggling to accept that my own parents could orchestrate something so calculated. But as I pulled into my apartment complex, I spotted something that made my stomach drop. My landlord, Mr. Peterson, was talking to a man in a suit near the entrance. The stranger was taking notes, occasionally glancing up at my window. Instead of parking in my usual spot, I continued past and parked 3 blocks away. I needed to think, to plan. If they were already this far into their scheme, I couldn't afford to walk blindly into whatever trap they'd set in my home. From my car, I called my lawyer, James Morrison, who'd helped me with some paperwork after grandmother's death. His secretary said he was in court but would return my call within the hour. An hour felt like an eternity when every minute counted. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Sweetie, where are you? Dad and I are worried. Dr. Harrison said you seemed upset when you left. Please come to the house so we can talk." The casualness of her deception made bile rise in my throat. Dr. Harrison said I seemed upset I hadn't even entered his office. They were already creating a narrative where I'd had some kind of episode during the appointment. Another text followed. "Your father found some concerning items in your apartment when he stopped by to check on you. We need to discuss this as a family." My apartment. They were in my apartment right now, planting God knows what to support their case. The violation of it, the calculated cruelty, took my breath away. These weren't the parents who'd raised me, who'd attended every school play and cheered at every graduation. Or maybe they were, and I'd just never seen this side of them before. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That my parents were in my apartment, which they had a spare key to, that they were trying to have me committed based on papers I'd glimpsed for 30 seconds. Without proof, I'd sound exactly like the paranoid, delusional daughter they were painting me as. My lawyer finally called back and I gave him a rushed explanation. His silence grew heavier with each detail. Finally, he spoke, his voice grave. "Esther, if they've filed anything with the court, we need to act immediately. Can you come to my office?" "Is it safe? What if they're watching?" "Park in the garage on Maple Street. Enter through the coffee shop on the ground floor and take the internal elevator. I'll have my paralegal meet you." As I drove toward his office, one thought kept circling in my mind. They'd mentioned Willowbrook Psychiatric Facility, claimed I'd been a patient there. But I'd never even heard of the place before today. If they'd forged commitment papers from a real facility, there had to be a paper trail. Real or fake documents left evidence. My phone rang again. This time, it was my Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe to accept. "Esther, honey, are you all right? Your mother just called me in tears saying you've been having delusions about them trying to hurt you. She said you've been off your medication." "What medication, Aunt Patricia? I'm not on any medication." Her pause spoke volumes. "She said you'd say that." "Oh, honey, please let them help you. Your grandmother's death has been hard on all of us, but—" I hung up. The web was wider than I'd imagined. How many family members had they convinced? How many people now believed I was spiraling into mental illness? At the lawyer's office, James Morrison's expression grew increasingly grim as he made calls and checked court databases. Within an hour, he'd confirmed my worst fears. A petition had been filed 2 days ago for emergency guardianship, citing my deteriorating mental state and danger to myself. The hearing was scheduled for the end of the week. "They've included affidavits from 3 doctors claiming to have treated you," he said, sliding papers across his desk. "Do you know any of these names?" I scanned the list, my heart sinking. Dr. Harrison was there, along with 2 others I'd never heard of, all claiming to have been treating me for months for various psychiatric conditions. I've never seen any of these doctors. I haven't even been to my regular physician since my annual checkup 8 months ago. James leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "The speed of this, the coordination, it suggests they've been planning for a while. But here's what doesn't make sense. These documents are sloppy. Any decent investigation would reveal the forgeries. It's almost like they're counting on you not having time to mount a proper defense." 3 weeks, I whispered. "The trust matures in 3 weeks. Then that's our timeline. Esther, I need you to listen carefully. Do not go home. Do not be alone with your parents. Document everything. If they forged medical records, that's a federal crime. But we need proof." As I left his office through the same circuitous route, my phone had 17 missed calls. Parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, family, friends. The story was spreading like wildfire, each person who believed it becoming another witness to my supposed instability. But there was one thing they hadn't counted on. Grandmother Eleanor had raised me to be stronger than they knew. She'd taught me that when someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. My parents had just shown me exactly who they were. And I was going to show them who I was, too. The hotel room felt like a sanctuary, even though its beige walls and generic furniture offered little comfort. I'd paid cash, registered under a false name, and disabled my phone's location services. If I was going to fight my parents' elaborate scheme, I needed a safe place to think and plan without their surveillance. Sleep had been impossible. Instead, I'd spent the night creating a timeline, mapping out every strange incident from the past 6 months. What emerged was a pattern so insidious that I'd missed it entirely while living through it. It started with small things. My mother's sudden interest in visiting my apartment, always arriving with homemade food and herbal teas, she insisted would help with stress. The dizzy spells that followed, which she'd attribute to overwork. My father's new habit of calling during important meetings, then expressing concern to my colleagues about my inability to maintain work-life balance. The coffee incident at last month's family dinner hadn't been isolated. I remembered now the Thanksgiving gathering where I'd become violently ill after eating my mother's special stuffing. She'd rushed me to the bathroom, held my hair back, all while loudly telling relatives about my recent struggles with anxiety and eating issues. The Christmas party where my words had slurred after one glass of wine, leading to whispered concerns about my drinking. Each incident had been carefully orchestrated, witnesses strategically present. They'd been building a case for months, creating a documented history of instability that existed only in the minds of manipulated family members. My laptop became my lifeline as I searched for information about Willowbrook Psychiatric Facility. The place existed a sprawling complex 40 miles north of the city. Its website looked professional, promising compassionate care for those struggling with mental health challenges. But the online reviews told a different story. Complaints about lost paperwork, billing errors, and staff who seemed more interested in insurance payments than patient care. I needed proof I'd never been there, but how could I prove a negative? The answer came from an unexpected source, my credit card statements. I'd been meticulous about keeping financial records, a habit grandmother Eleanor had instilled. If I'd been committed to Willowbrook, there would be charges, insurance claims, something. I scrolled through months of statements. Nothing. But then I noticed something else. Charges I hadn't made. Small amounts at pharmacies I'd never visited. When I logged into my health insurance portal, my blood went cold. Claims had been filed for medications I'd never taken, antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, sedatives, all prescribed by doctors I'd never seen, filled at pharmacies across town. They'd been using my insurance information to create a false medical history. The violation felt physical, like discovering someone had been wearing my skin while I slept, but it was also evidence, real, tangible proof of their fraud. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Matthews, this is Dr. Michelle Chen from Riverside Mental Health. Your parents have asked me to perform an emergency evaluation. Please contact me immediately to schedule an appointment. Chen, one of the names on my parents' list of doctors who'd supposedly been treating me. My fingers flew across my laptop keyboard searching for information about her. No website. No professional listings, just a sparse social media profile that had been created 2 months ago. A knock at my hotel room door made me freeze. Had they found me already? But the voice that called out belonged to James Morrison's paralegal delivering documents he'd thought I should see immediately. The papers made my hands shake. My parents had submitted photos as evidence of my deteriorating condition. Pictures from family gatherings where I looked disheveled or distressed, all taken during the incidents they'd orchestrated. But there were other photos, too. Images of my apartment showing prescription bottles scattered on countertops, empty wine bottles in the trash journals with disturbing entries. Journals I'd never written, medications I'd never taken, evidence of a life I'd never lived. There's more, the paralegal said gently. Mr. Morrison discovered something about your parents' finances. The second set of documents revealed the depth of their desperation. Failed business ventures, mortgages on top of mortgages, credit cards maxed beyond reason. They were drowning in approximately $3 million of debt, with several loans coming due within the month. The timing of their scheme suddenly made perfect sense. But knowing why didn't make the betrayal hurt less. I spent the rest of the day reaching out to anyone who might help. My colleague Marcus, who confirmed my mother had called their office multiple times, expressing concern about my performance. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who mentioned my father had been asking questions about my visitors and daily routine. Even my yoga instructor revealed that my mother had approached her after class, wondering if I'd seemed unstable during sessions. The scope of their surveillance network was staggering. But in their thoroughness, they'd made a mistake. They'd left too many witnesses to their inquiries, too many people who could testify about their suspicious behavior. As evening approached, I knew I couldn't hide forever. I needed to go on the offensive, starting with Willowbrook. If they'd created false records, someone had helped them, someone who might be convinced to tell the truth. I drove to the facility as darkness fell, parking in the visitor lot, like any concerned family member might. The reception area smelled of industrial disinfectant and despair. The night receptionist, a young woman named Keisha, looked up from her computer with tired eyes. I need to verify some information about my supposed stay here. I began carefully. My name is Esther Matthews. According to some documents, I was a patient here last year. Keisha's fingers hesitated over her keyboard. Something flickered in her expression, recognition, fear, or perhaps guilt. I'm sorry I can't release patient information without proper authorization, she said, but her voice wavered. Even to confirm I was never actually here? I leaned forward, lowering my voice. Please. My parents are trying to have me committed based on forged records from this facility. I just need someone to tell the truth. She glanced around the empty lobby, then typed rapidly. Her frown deepened as she scrolled through screens. This is weird. There's an entry for you, but it's flagged. Flagged. Administrative override. Someone manually entered these records 2 weeks ago, bypassing the normal system. That's not supposed to be possible without... She trailed off, her face paling. Without what? Without high-level administrative access, like director level or above. Before I could respond, heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor. A security guard rounded the corner, his hand already reaching for his radio. Keisha's expression had shifted to panic. You need to leave. Now, she whispered urgently. They told us someone might come asking about those records. There's a whole alert about you. They said you're dangerous, delusional. I backed toward the door as the security guard approached. Who told you this? Who's they? But Keisha had already turned away, suddenly absorbed in her computer screen. The security guard's hand moved to his pepper spray as he called out, Ma'am, I need you to stop right there. I didn't stop. I pushed through the doors and ran for my car, my heart pounding as I heard him calling for backup. They'd anticipated this move, had warned the staff I might appear. The net was tightening around me. But as I drove away, I realized they'd revealed something crucial. The records were flagged, entered recently with administrative override. That meant there was a digital trail evidence of the forgery that existed in the hospital's own systems. My phone rang as I merged onto the highway. Sarah's name on the screen was a relief until I heard her voice strained and careful. Esther, where are you? I'm worried about you. Something in her tone set off alarms. Sarah, are you alone? A pause. Your parents are here. They're really concerned. They just want to help you. The betrayal cut deep, but I kept my voice steady. How much did they offer you? What Esther nobody offered. How much, Sarah? What's the price for selling out your best friend? I heard my mother's voice in the background coaching Sarah on what to say. My best friend of 15 years had been bought or threatened into compliance. The isolation was complete. I hung up and pulled into a rest stop, needing a moment to process this fresh wound. But there was no time for grief. If Sarah had turned, who else had they compromised? Who could I trust? The answer came with brutal clarity: no one. I was alone in this fight. But as I sat in that empty parking lot, something hardened inside me. They'd taken everything they could: my family's trust, my best friend's loyalty, my sense of security. They'd violated my home, my medical privacy, my very identity. They'd created an elaborate fiction designed to erase me. I thought of grandmother Eleanor, of her strength and wisdom. She'd survived worse than this, had built her fortune from nothing while facing discrimination and doubt. She'd chosen me as her heir, not just out of love, but because she'd seen something in me worth investing in. Time to prove her right. I opened my laptop and began composing emails to every advocacy group, journalist, and watchdog organization I could find. If my parents wanted to make me famous as a mental patient, I'd become famous on my own terms, as a survivor, as a fighter, as the woman who exposed their crimes. They thought they'd covered every angle, anticipated every move, but they'd made one crucial error. They'd underestimated me. They'd confused my trust in them for weakness, my love for blindness. Now they'd learned that Eleanor Matthews' granddaughter was made of stronger stuff than they'd ever imagined. Dawn broke gray and unwelcoming as I sat in my car outside Willowbrook Psychiatric Facility, watching the day shift arrive. I'd spent the night researching, planning, and most importantly, recording. Every conversation, every piece of evidence was now backed up in 3 different cloud services. If I was going down, I was taking them with me. The employee entrance was bustling with activity around 7 in the morning. Nurses, orderlies, and administrative staff badged in, most looking as tired as I felt. I watched for someone who might be willing to talk, someone who looked kind or troubled by their conscience. That's when I spotted her, a middle-aged Latina woman in scrubs who paused at the entrance, her face creased with worry as she spoke intensely into her phone. When she hung up, she pressed her fingers to her temples. In a gesture, I recognized the weight of moral conflict. I intercepted her at her car during her morning break 3 hours later. "Excuse me, are you a nurse here?" She tensed immediately, keys clutched between her fingers. "Yes. What do you want?" "My name is Esther Matthews. Someone here created false records saying I was a patient. I think you might know something about it." Her face went through a series of expressions: recognition, fear, then something that looked like relief. She glanced around the empty parking lot before speaking. "I'm Maria Santos. I can't talk here." "Where?" "The diner on Route 12. 20 minutes. Come alone." She hurried away before I could respond. The diner was a classic roadside establishment, all chrome and cracked vinyl seats. Maria was already in a back booth when I arrived, coffee cooling in front of her. She'd changed out of her scrubs into civilian clothes, as if the uniform might somehow implicate her. "I knew someone would come eventually." She began without preamble. "What they're doing, it's wrong. But I have 3 kids, and jobs aren't easy to find with my record." "Your record?" "I was whistleblower 8 years ago at another facility, reported Medicare fraud. They made sure I couldn't work anywhere decent after that. Willowbrook was the only place that would hire me." She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. "I keep my head down now, but what they did with your records, it's eating at me." I leaned forward. "What exactly did they do?" Maria pulled out her phone, glancing nervously at the door. 2 weeks ago, Dr. Peterson, the director, called a meeting. Just him, the head of records, and 2 other administrators. They had a stack of papers and a list of names. Your name was on it. She showed me a photo she'd taken of a memo, slightly blurry but readable. It outlined procedures for creating retroactive patient files, complete with admission dates, treatment notes, and discharge summaries. They said it was for insurance reconciliation, fixing old paperwork errors. But I've been doing this for 20 years. You don't create entire patient histories for insurance. And the money, she shook her head, $50,000 in cash distributed to key staff. Hush money. Who's paying them? The payments came through a lawyer. Garrison, I think. But there was someone else. Someone who met with Dr. Peterson privately. I saw him leaving once. Well-dressed, drove a Mercedes, looked like money. My father drove a Mercedes. Maria, I need those real patient logs, the ones that prove I was never there. She shifted uncomfortably. I can't access the official system without leaving a digital trail, but... She reached into her purse and pulled out a flash drive. I've been keeping my own records. Call me paranoid after what happened before, but I document everything. This has screen captures of the real admission logs for the dates they claim you were here. Your name isn't on them. I took the drive with shaking hands. Why are you helping me? Because I have daughters. Because what they're doing is evil. And because... She met my eyes. Dr. Peterson made a mistake. He got greedy. Your case isn't the only one. There are 6 other names on that list. 6 other people whose families are trying to steal from them. He's running a whole operation. The implications hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about me. My parents had connected with an entire network of predators, all working together to destroy lives for profit. There's more, Maria continued. That psychiatrist, they're sending people to Dr. Harrison. He used to work here. Got fired 3 years ago for taking bribes to sign commitment papers. But his medical license still shows as active because he falsified the termination paperwork. The real authorities don't know he was fired for cause. She slid a folder across the table. Copies of his termination documents, the internal investigation report, everything. I thought someday someone might need them. Maria, this is evidence of massive fraud. We need to go to the authorities. With what exactly stolen documents from a whistleblower with a grudge? They've already painted you as unstable. Who's going to believe us? She stood to leave, then paused. But there is someone. One of the other names on that list, Jennifer Walsh. Her brother is trying to have her committed too. She's been fighting back, hired some serious lawyers. Maybe together. She left me with Jennifer's contact information and a warning, be careful. These people have connections everywhere. And Esther, don't go home. I heard them talking. They're planning something for tomorrow. I spent the afternoon verifying Maria's information. The flash drive contained irrefutable proof, dated admission logs, staff schedules, patient room assignments. For every date my parents claimed I'd been at Willowbrook, the records showed other patients in those beds. The forgery was undeniable. Jennifer Walsh answered on the third ring, her voice cautious but strong. Who is this? My name is Esther Matthews. I think we have something in common. Our families are both trying to have us committed using the same forged records from Willowbrook. The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Then, oh, thank God. I thought I was going crazy. Can we meet? We arranged to meet at her lawyer's office within the hour. Jennifer was everything I wasn't tall polished with the kind of presence that commanded attention. But her eyes held the same haunted look I'd seen in my hotel mirror that morning. 3 weeks ago, my brother filed for emergency guardianship, she explained. Said I was bipolar, a danger to myself. Complete fabrication. But he has power of attorney for our father's company, and if I'm declared incompetent, my shares revert to him. Her lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Okonkwo, had already uncovered much of the Willowbrook connection. We've identified at least 4 families using the same playbook. Forged records from Willowbrook evaluations by discredited psychiatrists, rushed guardianship hearings. It's coordinated. I shared Maria's evidence, watching Patricia's expression shift from interest to excitement to grim determination. This is it, she said. This is what we needed. With this evidence, we can prove conspiracy. But we need to move fast. Jennifer's hearing is in 3 days. When is yours? End of the week. Then we file federal charges tomorrow. Forgery of medical records across state lines, conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft. We make it too big to ignore. As we strategized, my phone buzzed with increasingly frantic messages from my parents. They'd escalated from concerned to demanding to threatening. The last voicemail from my father chilled me. Esther, you're sick. You need help. If you don't come home by tonight, we'll have to take drastic measures. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. But I was done making things easy for them. I thought about calling them back, confronting them with everything I knew. But Patricia advised against it. Let them think you're running scared. The more confident they get, the more mistakes they'll make. That evening, I checked into a different hotel under Jennifer's company account. She'd insisted, saying we needed to stick together now. As I lay in an unfamiliar bed, I thought about the morning I'd stood outside Dr. Harrison's office, frozen in shock at my parents' betrayal. So much had changed in just 48 hours. I'd gone from victim to investigator, from isolated to allied, from helpless to armed with evidence. But the biggest change was internal. The daughter who'd trusted blindly was gone. In her place stood someone harder, warier, but also stronger. My phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. My blood chilled as I read it. You think you're clever, but you're just proving how sick you are. Paranoid delusions, conspiracy theories. Dr. Harrison is looking forward to evaluating you properly. Sweet dreams, darling. Love, Mom. They were tracking my moves, probably through the phone. I powered it off, removing the battery for good measure. Tomorrow I'd get a new one. Tomorrow we'd file charges that would destroy their plan. But tonight I sat in darkness and let myself feel the full weight of what I'd lost. Not money or security, but the illusion that my parents had ever truly loved me. That truth hurt worse than all their schemes combined. Still, Grandmother Eleanor hadn't raised me to wallow. She'd raised me to rise. And tomorrow the rising would begin. The federal building's marble steps seemed to stretch endlessly as Jennifer, Patricia, and I climbed toward what we hoped would be justice. But the system I was learning moved at its own pace, indifferent to our urgency. We'd been promised a meeting with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, but bureaucracy had other plans. "I'm sorry," the receptionist said, not looking sorry at all. "Agent Thompson has been called to an emergency. Can you come back next week?" Next week would be too late. My hearing was in 4 days, Jennifer's in 2. Patricia argued, threatened, even invoked names of higher-ups, but we were shuffled out with vague promises of returned calls. "We need another approach," Patricia muttered as we regrouped in a nearby coffee shop. "The evidence is solid, but if we can't get anyone to look at it—" "What about the media?" Jennifer suggested. "Financial fraud, family betrayal, conspiracy. It's the kind of story they love." I shook my head. My parents have already painted me as delusional. Any reporter would see a mental patient making wild accusations. We need someone with credibility to speak first. That's when my new phone purchased that morning with cash rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe accept. "Miss Matthews, this is Agent Marcus Fletcher with the FBI. I understand you've been trying to file a report about medical fraud." My heart leaped, then immediately grew suspicious. "How did you get this number? I just activated this phone 2 hours ago." A chuckle. "Maria Santos gave it to me. She said you might be cautious, and you should be. Can we meet, not at the federal building, somewhere public?" We arranged to meet at a busy shopping center, Patricia insisting on accompanying me. Agent Fletcher turned out to be younger than I'd expected, with keen eyes that missed nothing, and credentials that Patricia verified through 3 different sources. "I've been investigating Dr. Harrison for 6 months," he explained, sliding a thick folder across the table. "He's part of a larger network. Corrupt doctors, facility administrators, lawyers, all working together to facilitate guardianship fraud. Your parents stumbled into this network through their lawyer, Garrison." The folder contained surveillance photos, financial records, transcripts. Dr. Harrison appeared in many of them, but always as Gregory Harrison, Michael Harrison, Thomas Harrison. Different first names, same man licenses in multiple states under various identities. "He lost his medical license in Nevada 5 years ago," Fletcher continued. "Moved to Arizona, got licensed under a different first name. Lost that one too. Now he's here, and we've been building a case. Your situation might be exactly what we need to take the whole network down. But our hearings are this week. Can you stop them?" Fletcher's expression grew grim. "Officially, no. These things take time. Unofficially, I might be able to help. But you need to understand these people are dangerous. We've linked them to 3 deaths. Elderly people who died shortly after being committed and stripped of their assets." Jennifer gasped. "My father has a heart condition. If they get control and put him somewhere—" "Which is why we need to be smart," Fletcher said. "Here's what I propose. Continue with your legal preparations, but let them think they're winning. I'll be at your hearing, Esther. When they present Dr. Harrison, that's when we'll spring the trap." "What trap?" He smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Dr. Harrison has no idea we've been watching him. He thinks his current identity is clean, but we have video of him accepting bribes, audio of him coaching families on how to fake symptoms. When he takes that stand, he won't be testifying as Dr. Harrison. He'll be confessing to years of fraud." The plan offered hope, but depending on a last-minute revelation felt risky. Patricia voiced my concerns. What if the judge rules before you can act? What if they have other doctors lined up? "Then we go to Plan B," Fletcher said. "But let's hope it doesn't come to that. Plan B tends to get messy." That evening, I sat in my hotel room reviewing everything we'd learned. The network was vast, at least 12 doctors, 4 facilities, 20 lawyers, and dozens of families destroyed. My parents were small players in a much larger game pawns who'd paid to play. My phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Emma. "Esther, please listen to your parents. We're all worried. You're not yourself lately." I started to delete it, then paused. Emma had always been kind to me, one of the few relatives I trusted. On impulse, I called her. "Emma, I need you to listen without interrupting. Can you do that?" "Esther, your parents said—" "Without interrupting, please, just 5 minutes." She agreed, and I laid out everything. The forged documents, the bribe doctors, the FBI investigation. I could hear her breathing change as I spoke from skeptical to concerned to horrified. "Oh my God," she whispered when I finished. "Aunt Catherine showed me prescription bottles, said you'd been hiding them. But if you've never taken those medications—" "Emma, I need one person in the family to know the truth. Can you be that person?" A long pause. "I believe you. What they're describing, it's not the cousin I know. And honestly, I always thought there was something off about how eager they've been to control grandmother Eleanor's money. One ally in the family. It wasn't much, but it was something." The next morning brought disturbing news. Maria called, her voice shaking. "They know I talked to you. Dr. Peterson called me into his office, asked about the missing files. I denied everything, but Esther, I'm scared. There was a car outside my house all night." I immediately called Agent Fletcher, who promised to send protection. But the message was clear. The network knew we were fighting back. That afternoon, I made a dangerous decision. I needed to see Dr. Harrison for myself to understand who this man was, who sold his oath for money. His office was in an upscale medical building, all glass and false promises of healing. I wore a wig, sunglasses, clothes that changed my silhouette. I scheduled an appointment under a false name, claiming anxiety about an upcoming family situation. The receptionist barely looked up as she took my cash payment. Dr. Harrison's office was designed to intimidate dark wood, imposing desk diplomas that I now knew were forgeries. The man himself was unremarkable. Average height, soft features, the kind of person you'd forget minutes after meeting. Perhaps that was his advantage. "So, Miss," he glanced at his notes, "Smith, tell me about these anxiety issues." I spun a story about family pressure, inheritance disputes, feeling like everyone was against me. His eyes sharpened with each detail, and I could see him calculating, wondering if I might be another potential victim. "Family conflicts can be very stressful," he said smoothly. "Sometimes, when there's significant money involved, it might be better for everyone if a neutral party managed things. Have you considered voluntary commitment, just temporarily to show good faith?" There it was, the soft sell, the gentle push toward giving up my rights. I wanted to record him to capture this predatory behavior, but Fletcher had warned me against it. Too risky, too easy to detect. "I should think about it," I said, standing to leave. "You've given me a lot to consider." "Of course, but don't wait too long. These situations can escalate quickly. Sometimes families feel forced to take protective action." A threat wrapped in concern. I left feeling dirty, contaminated by his presence. This was the man my parents had chosen to destroy me, this soft-spoken predator who turned medical authority into a weapon. Back at the hotel, Jennifer was pacing her phone clutched in her hand. "My brother just offered me a deal. Drop the federal complaint, accept voluntary outpatient treatment, and he'll give me a small monthly allowance from my own trust fund." "You're not considering it?" "No, but the fact that he's negotiating means he's scared. They know we're not going down without a fight." That night, we strategized with Patricia until our eyes burned and our voices grew hoarse. We had evidence, we had federal interest, we had the truth. But would it be enough against a coordinated lie backed by medical authority? As I finally fell into bed, my phone lit up with one last message, this time from my father. "Your mother is heartbroken. You're destroying our family with these paranoid accusations. But we forgive you. We know it's the illness talking. Dr. Harrison says with proper treatment, you could be yourself again within a year. Please, sweetheart, let us help you." A year. They planned to keep me locked away for a year while they drained every penny of my inheritance. The calculation of it, the casual cruelty disguised as care, made me want to scream. Instead, I typed back a single word, "no." Then I blocked the number. I was done listening to their lies, done pretending there was any love left to salvage. They'd chosen money over their daughter. Now they'd learn that choices have consequences. 3 days until my hearing. 3 days to prepare for the fight of my life. But I wasn't the same woman who'd stumbled upon their deception in Dr. Harrison's waiting room. That woman had been shocked into paralysis. This one was forged in fury and ready for war. They wanted to paint me as crazy fine. I'd show them what a woman driven to the edge could accomplish when she had nothing left to lose, but everything to fight for. The morning of my hearing arrived with unseasonable rain, as if the weather itself reflected the storm about to unfold in that courthouse. I dressed carefully in the navy suit grandmother Eleanor had bought me for my college graduation, her voice echoing in my memory, "When you look your best, you fight your best." Patricia had drilled me for hours on courtroom procedure, but nothing could have prepared me for the moment I walked into that wood-paneled room and saw my parents seated at the petitioner's table. My mother wore her favorite pearl necklace, the one I'd given her for her 50th birthday. My father had his reading glasses perched on his nose, looking every inch the concerned parent. They didn't meet my eyes. The gallery was surprisingly full. Jennifer sat in the front row offering silent support. Agent Fletcher was nowhere to be seen, but he'd promised he'd be there. I had to trust that promise. Behind my parents sat various relatives, including Aunt Patricia, who kept dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Only Emma met my gaze, offering the slightest nod of encouragement. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Margaret Chen," the bailiff announced. Judge Chen was a small woman with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She reviewed the papers before her with methodical precision while the room held its breath. My parents' lawyer, Mr. Garrison, stood first. He was exactly what you'd expect from someone who facilitated fraud, expensive suit practice, smile, and eyes as cold as winter stone. "Your Honor, we're here today because Robert and Catherine Matthews are desperate to save their daughter's life. Esther Matthews has been spiraling into paranoid delusions for months, refusing treatment, making wild accusations against anyone who tries to help her. Her parents have exhausted every other option." He presented their case with surgical precision. The forged medical records, the false testimonies from bribed relatives, the prescription bottles they'd planted. Each piece of evidence painted a picture of a woman in desperate need of intervention. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed it myself. "We have here sworn affidavits from 3 psychiatrists who have treated Miss Matthews." Garrison continued spreading papers across his table. Each independently concluded she suffers from severe paranoid personality disorder with delusional episodes. Her recent behavior, including hiding from her family and making accusations of conspiracy, only confirms their diagnoses. Patricia objected repeatedly, but Garrison had done his homework. Every document appeared legitimate on its surface. Every witness seemed credible. My mother even took the stand, tears streaming down her face, as she described finding me talking to invisible people, destroying family photos, threatening to hurt myself. Lies, all lies. But she sold them with the conviction of a mother's breaking heart. "I just want my daughter back," she sobbed. The real Esther, not this person consumed by paranoia and hatred. When Patricia finally got to cross-examine my mother's mask, never slipped. She had an answer for everything, each response perfectly crafted to reinforce my supposed instability. "Isn't it true you have significant debts?" Patricia pressed. "We've had some business setbacks," my mother admitted. "But that has nothing to do with Esther's condition. If anything, the stress of our financial situation probably contributed to her breakdown. We blame ourselves for not seeing the signs sooner." It was brilliant, really. Taking their motive and turning it into evidence of my fragility. I watched my father nod supportively, playing the role of devoted husband, standing by his family through crisis. Then Garrison called Dr. Harrison to the stand. He entered with the confidence of a man who'd done this dozens of times before. His credentials were presented, his experience lauded. He spoke about my case with clinical detachment, describing symptoms. I'd never exhibited sessions. We'd never had medications he'd never prescribed, but claimed I desperately needed. In my professional opinion, he stated, adjusting his glasses for effect, Miss Matthews presents a clear danger to herself. Her delusions have intensified to the point where she believes her own parents are trying to harm her. Without immediate intervention, I fear she may act on these paranoid fantasies. I forced myself to remain calm, to not react. Patricia had warned me that any emotional display would be used against me. But sitting there listening to this man methodically destroy my life, with lies tested every ounce of self-control I possessed. That's when I noticed movement in the back of the courtroom. Agent Fletcher had arrived, but he wasn't alone. 2 other agents flanked him, and they weren't watching me. Their attention was fixed entirely on Dr. Harrison. Patricia began her cross-examination carefully. Dr. Harrison, can you tell the court where you received your medical degree? Johns Hopkins, he replied smoothly. And your residency? Massachusetts General. I see. And you're licensed to practice in this state? Of course, for over 10 years. Patricia nodded, then pulled out a folder. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that calls into question Dr. Harrison's credentials and testimony. Garrison objected immediately, but Judge Chen overruled him. I'll allow it. Dr. Harrison, is it true you were terminated from Willowbrook Psychiatric Facility 3 years ago? His composure cracked slightly. I don't see how that's relevant to... Please answer the question. There was a disagreement about administrative procedures. I chose to leave. Isn't it true you were terminated for accepting bribes to falsify patient records? The courtroom erupted. Garrison jumped to his feet, objecting loudly. My parents exchanged worried glances. Dr. Harrison's face had gone pale. That's a malicious lie, he sputtered. I've never... That's when Agent Fletcher stood. Your Honor, I'm Agent Marcus Fletcher with the FBI. We need to discuss Dr. Harrison's testimony. The judge's eyes widened. Approach the bench, all counsel. The whispered conference that followed felt eternal. I could see Garrison gesturing frantically, while Patricia remained calm, occasionally pointing to documents. Agent Fletcher spoke quietly but authoritatively, showing his credentials and what looked like a federal warrant. Finally, Judge Chen banged her gavel. We'll take a 30-minute recess. Dr. Harrison, you are not to leave this courtroom. Bailiff, please ensure he remains here. Dr. Harrison's confident facade crumbled entirely. He slumped in the witness chair, sweat beading on his forehead. My parents huddled with Garrison, their whispered conversation growing increasingly agitated. Jennifer squeezed my shoulder as we waited in the hallway. This is it. They didn't expect the FBI. But I couldn't celebrate yet. Too much could still go wrong. When court reconvened, Judge Chen's expression had hardened considerably. I've reviewed the federal evidence regarding Dr. Harrison. It appears there are serious questions about his credentials and practices. Dr. Harrison, do you wish to continue your testimony? He looked around the room like a trapped animal, then shook his head. On advice of counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment rights. The collapse was swift after that. Without their star witness, my parents' case faltered. Patricia presented our evidence, the real records from Willowbrook, showing I'd never been a patient proof of the forged prescriptions testimonies from Maria and other whistleblowers about the fraudulent scheme. But the killing blow came from an unexpected source. Your Honor, Agent Fletcher said, we'd like to present additional evidence. Security footage from Dr. Harrison's office showing Robert Matthews delivering a cash payment 3 weeks ago, along with recorded conversations discussing the plan to have his daughter committed. My father's face went gray. My mother let out a small gasp. They'd been so careful but not careful enough. The video was damning. My father sliding an envelope across Dr. Harrison's desk, their voices clear as they discussed my symptoms and how to make the commitment stick. Dr. Harrison assuring them that once I was in the system, it would be nearly impossible for me to get out without their consent. We just need her controlled until the trust vests, my father's recorded voice said. After that, if she improves, wonderful. If not, well, long-term care is sometimes necessary. The casualness with which he discussed imprisoning me indefinitely made several people in the gallery gasp. Emma had tears running down her face. Even Aunt Patricia looked shocked. Judge Chen had seen enough. This is deeply disturbing. Not only does it appear the petitioners have submitted fraudulent evidence, but they may have engaged in criminal conspiracy. I'm dismissing this petition immediately. Miss Matthews, you're free to go. As for the petitioners and their counsel, I'm referring this entire matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. The gavel came down with finality. My parents tried to leave quickly, but FBI agents blocked their path. The arrest was quiet, professional, but the handcuffs caught the light as they were applied. My mother looked back at me once, and for a moment, I saw something that might have been regret, or maybe it was just disappointment that they'd failed. I stood there numb as the courtroom emptied. I'd won, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the end of everything I'd once believed about my family. Patricia hugged me tightly. You did it. You're safe. But I wasn't thinking about safety. I was thinking about Sunday dinners that would never happen again. Birthday cards I'd never received the parents I'd lost long before this moment. They'd been gone the instant they'd decided my inheritance mattered more than their daughter. Agent Fletcher approached as we gathered our things. This was just the beginning. With Dr. Harrison's arrest, we can unravel the entire network. You've helped save a lot of people, Miss Matthews. Maybe that would feel meaningful later. Right now, all I felt was empty. As we left the courthouse, Emma caught up with us. Esther, I'm so sorry. I had no idea how deep this went. The whole family is in shock. The family that believed them, that testified against me. She flinched. Some of them really thought they were helping. Your parents were very convincing. I know, I said quietly. That's what makes it worse. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and clean. Jennifer waited by the car, her own hearing scheduled for tomorrow. But with Dr. Harrison in custody and the conspiracy exposed, her brother's case would likely fall apart too. What now? Patricia asked as we stood on the courthouse steps. What now indeed? I was free. My inheritance, secure, my sanity, officially validated. But freedom felt strange when it came at the cost of everything else. Now, I said, thinking of grandmother Eleanor and the strength she'd passed down to me, we make sure this never happens to anyone else. It wasn't healing, not yet, but it was a purpose. And for now, that would have to be enough. The FBI field office buzzed with activity that felt surreal after the emotional chaos of the courtroom. Agent Fletcher led Jennifer and me through corridors lined with wanted posters and commendations into a conference room where the full scope of what we'd uncovered waited on display boards and evidence boxes. Welcome to Operation False Guardian, Fletcher said, gesturing to a wall covered with photos connecting strings and financial documents. You've helped us crack open something we've been tracking for 2 years. The web was staggering. At the center sat Dr. Harrison, or rather the 5 versions of him practicing under different names across 3 states. Radiating outward were connections to corrupt lawyers, facility administrators, and even 2 judges who'd rubber-stamped questionable guardianship orders. Your parents were actually small-time, Agent Roth, Fletcher's partner, explained. They paid $100,000 up front to access the network. Others have paid millions. The Harrison identity alone has generated over $8 million in bribes. I studied the board, trying to process the scale of suffering it represented. Each connection point was a life destroyed, a family torn apart by greed. One photo made me freeze an elderly woman with kind eyes labeled Margaret Matthews, deceased. That's Robert's aunt. Fletcher confirmed, watching my reaction. We exhumed her body last week. The toxicology report showed massive overdoses of psychotropic medications she never needed. My legs felt weak. Jennifer guided me to a chair while the agents continued their briefing. They'd been building this case carefully, but always missing the final pieces that would make it stick. Our evidence, our recordings, our willingness to testify had changed everything. The arrests started this morning, Roth said. Dr. Harrison was just the beginning. We've picked up 6 lawyers, 4 facility administrators, and 12 family members who participated in various schemes. Your parents' lawyer, Garrison. He flipped immediately, gave us everything in exchange for a reduced sentence. The interrogation videos they showed us were chilling. Garrison detailed the entire operation with business-like precision. For a flat fee plus percentage of assets stolen, they provided everything: forged documents, compliant doctors, even actors to play concerned friends if needed. They had templates for every scenario, scripts for every testimony. The beauty of it, Garrison said in the recording, was that once someone was in the system, they couldn't fight back. Who believes a mental patient claiming conspiracy? The more they protested, the crazier they seemed. But then Fletcher showed us something that made my blood boil in a different way. Financial records proving the network had connections beyond just families seeking guardianships. Insurance companies paying to have difficult claimants declared incompetent. Business partners eliminating competition. Even a case where a whistleblower was silenced through forced commitment. "This is organized crime," Jennifer breathed. "Medical fraud as a weapon." "Exactly. Which is why we need your help to take it all down." Fletcher pulled out thick folders. "We need you both to testify before a federal grand jury. Every detail, every document, every conversation. It'll be tough, but it's the only way to ensure these people never hurt anyone again." I thought about refusing. Part of me wanted to take my freedom and disappear to pretend none of this had happened. But then I remembered Maria risking everything to hand me that flash drive. The other 6 names on that list. Aunt Margaret dying alone in a facility her desperate letters ignored. "When do we start?" I asked. The preparation consumed the next 3 days. FBI agents debriefed us repeatedly, building airtight testimonies. We met with federal prosecutors who walked us through what to expect. The questions would be brutal, they warned. Defense attorneys would attack our credibility, dredge up any mistake we'd ever made. "They'll paint you as bitter daughters seeking revenge," the lead prosecutor, Ann Valdez, explained. "Your job is to stay calm and stick to the facts. Let the evidence speak." Between sessions, I dealt with the aftermath of my parents' arrest. Their assets were frozen, their house searched. Investigators found more evidence there, detailed notes about my habits, printouts from websites about mental illness symptoms, even practice videos of my mother rehearsing her tearful testimony. The family reaction split predictably. Some relatives faced with evidence expressed horror and apologized for doubting me. Others remained convinced I'd somehow orchestrated everything, that I was the ungrateful daughter who destroyed her loving parents. Emma became my sole bridge to that world, fielding calls and filtering information. "Aunt Patricia wants to know if you'll accept her apology," Emma reported during one of our coffee meetings. "She says she should have known something was wrong when your mom kept insisting you were sick, despite seeming fine at every family event." "Tell her I need time," I said. It was the same response I gave to all of them. Forgiveness felt impossible when the wounds were still bleeding. On the 4th day, something unexpected happened. A woman appeared at my hotel, flanked by 2 teenagers. She was thin, well-dressed, but with the hollow eyes of someone who'd survived trauma. "Miss Matthews, I'm Carol Hendricks. These are my children, Tyler and Megan. I heard about your case on the news. 3 years ago, my husband had me committed using the same network. By the time I got out, he'd divorced me, taken our assets, and convinced our kids I was dangerous." Tyler, who looked about 17, spoke up. "We believed him. Mom would write these letters from the hospital, and Dad said it was her illness talking. We didn't visit, didn't question it. When she got out, we were scared of her." "What changed?" Jennifer asked gently. "Your case," Megan said. "When we saw the news about the conspiracy, Tyler and I started questioning everything. We confronted Dad, and he broke down, admitted it all. Said Mom was getting too independent, threatening to expose his affairs." Carol pulled out a thick folder. I kept everything. Every forged document, every lying doctor's note. I've been trying to get someone to listen for 2 years. The FBI says with your case breaking it open, they can finally pursue mine. We spent hours with the Hendricks family comparing experiences, sharing evidence. Tyler and Megan's guilt was palpable, but Carol's grace in forgiving them gave me hope that maybe someday I could find that same capacity. The grand jury convened a week later in a federal courthouse that felt more like a fortress. Security was tight. The network had resources in reach. Fletcher's team escorted us through underground passages to avoid potential threats. Testifying felt like reliving the nightmare in excruciating detail. For 6 hours, I walked the jury through every moment, discovering the conspiracy-gathering evidence, watching my parents lie with practiced ease. I showed them documents, played recordings, explained the sophisticated cruelty of using love as a weapon. Jennifer's testimony revealed even darker corners. Her brother had connections to a judge who'd presided over dozens of suspicious guardianship cases, the same judge who'd been scheduled to hear my case if Judge Chen hadn't been available. The assignments weren't random, Jennifer explained. They had people everywhere ensuring sympathetic ears wherever possible. But it was Maria Santos who provided the most damaging testimony. Despite threats and attempted bribes, she appeared with boxes of evidence she'd been collecting for years. Patient files, financial records, recorded conversations of administrators discussing their special arrangement. "I watched them destroy lives for profit," she told the jury. Elderly people who died mysteriously after being committed, young adults whose families wanted their trust funds. They'd joke about it in staff meetings, calling them golden geese. Each fraudulent commitment was worth at least $1 million in kickbacks. The final witness shocked everyone, Catherine Matthews, my mother appearing via video link from federal custody. She'd been offered a deal for cooperation and took it. Her testimony was devastating in its casualness. "Robert found Garrison through his golf club," she stated flatly. Said lots of members had used his services for problem relatives. "We toured Willowbrook, met Dr. Harrison. They made it sound so simple. Temporary commitment just until the trust matured. They said Esther would barely notice that the medications would keep her comfortable." "Did you believe your daughter was actually mentally ill?" the prosecutor asked. A pause. "No. But the debt collectors were threatening to take our house. Robert said it was just borrowing from family that we'd make it up to her later. Just borrowing. As if my freedom, my sanity, my trust were things that could be returned with interest." The grand jury took only 3 hours to return indictments. 67 people charged with various counts of conspiracy fraud, false imprisonment, and in 3 cases, murder. The network that had operated for 7 years was finally in the light. That evening, Fletcher took Jennifer and me to a small celebration at a nearby restaurant. Other survivors had gathered: Carol Hendricks, a young man whose wife's family had tried to steal his tech company, an elderly woman who'd escaped commitment by fleeing the state. "You did this," Fletcher said, raising his glass. "Your courage broke it open." But I was thinking about all the ones who hadn't survived, who were still trapped in institutions or silenced forever. The victory felt hollow compared to the scope of loss. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Grandma Eleanor's lawyer wants to meet with you. Says there's something else about the estate you need to know." Another surprise in a week full of them. But whatever it was could wait. Tonight was for the survivors, for bearing witness to each other's pain and resilience. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but we'd face them together. The network was broken, but the healing had just begun. The meeting with grandmother Eleanor's lawyer took place in his office overlooking the harbor, the same place where she'd signed her will 3 years before her death. Harold Whitman was old school with silver hair and kind eyes that had seen too much of families torn apart by money. "Esther, what I'm about to show you might be disturbing." He began pulling out a sealed envelope. "Eleanor left instructions that this should only be opened if certain circumstances arose. Your parents' arrest triggered those circumstances." Inside was a letter in my grandmother's distinctive handwriting dated 6 months before she died. "My dearest Esther, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true. By now you know what Catherine and Robert are capable of. What you don't know is that they've done this before. My hands trembled as I continued reading. She detailed suspicious circumstances around Aunt Margaret's commitment and death. Private investigators' reports she'd commissioned her growing certainty that her daughter and son-in-law were dangerous. I wanted to warn you directly, the letter continued, but my lawyers advised that without proof it might push them to act sooner, so I took precautions. Harold has evidence I gathered. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you completely, but I made sure you'd have the tools to fight back. Harold handed me a safety deposit box key. She hired private investigators for 2 years. Everything they found is in there. She also recorded several conversations with your parents where they discussed their debts and made veiled references to Margaret's estate. The bank vault felt like a tomb as I opened box after box of evidence my grandmother had compiled. Photos of my parents meeting with suspicious individuals, financial records showing large cash deposits after Margaret's death. Most damning, a recording from a family dinner where my father, drunk, had bragged about how easy it had been to have his difficult aunt put away. But there was more. Eleanor had also investigated the facilities where Margaret died, finding patterns of suspicious deaths among wealthy patients. She'd traced connections that the FBI was only now discovering. My 80-year-old grandmother had been conducting her own investigation from her garden club meetings and charity luncheons. She knew, I whispered to Jennifer, who'd accompanied me. She knew everything and still couldn't stop them. But she made sure you could, Jennifer pointed out. Among the evidence was something that broke my heart: letters from Margaret that Eleanor had somehow obtained. Not the ones sent to family, but secret ones she'd managed to smuggle to a friend on the outside. "They're killing me slowly," one letter read. "The medications make my heart race. My hands shake. I begged the doctor to reduce them, but he just increases the dose. Robert visits weekly, always asking about my will, whether I want to make any changes. I'm terrified to sleep because I might not wake up." Another letter dated just days before her death. "If something happens to me, please make sure Eleanor knows it wasn't natural. Robert brought papers yesterday, wanted me to sign over power of attorney. When I refused, he said I was being selfish, that family takes care of family. The nurse who was kind to me has been transferred. I'm alone now." I had to leave the vault, stumbling outside where I could breathe. The weight of it, the premeditation, the fact that my grandmother had known and tried to protect me, even from beyond the grave, it was overwhelming. Agent Fletcher met us that afternoon, his expression growing darker as he reviewed Eleanor's evidence. "This is extensive. Your grandmother did our job for us. With this, we can charge your parents with murder." The word hit like a physical blow. My parents weren't just thieves or fraudsters. They were killers. "There's something else," Fletcher said gently. "We've found 3 other elderly relatives in your extended family who died under suspicious circumstances over the past decade, all childless or widowed, all leaving estates to various family members. Your parents weren't the only ones in your family involved in this." The investigation exploded outward from there. What had seemed like a single conspiracy revealed itself as a generational pattern of predation. Cousins, uncles, even a family friend who'd been welcomed at every holiday dinner, all connected to suspicious deaths and fraudulent commitments. Emma was devastated when her own father was arrested. "I grew up thinking we were a close family," she said through tears, "but we were just a network of criminals pretending at love." The media descended like vultures, dubbing it the family fraud murders. Every detail of our lives became public consumption. Childhood photos were dissected for signs of sociopathy. Home videos were analyzed by body language experts. The Matthews family became synonymous with greed and betrayal. But among the circus came unexpected allies. Margaret's nurse, the one who'd been transferred, reached out through Fletcher. Nancy Petrin was retired now, but had never forgotten Margaret's fear. "I tried to report it," she told us over coffee, her weathered hands wrapped around her cup. "But Dr. Peterson, the one running Willowbrook, now he was assistant director then, he made sure my concerns were buried, called me hysterical, threatened my license. I kept copies of everything, though, hoping someday someone would listen." Her records confirmed Margaret had been systematically overdosed with medications that damaged her heart. The pattern was clear: start with normal doses, gradually increase, dismiss any complaints as delusion. Within months, the patient would be dead from natural causes. We sat with Nancy for hours as she detailed other patients who died the same way. All wealthy, all with family members who visited regularly to check on inheritance arrangements. She'd tried to compile evidence but faced threats and eventual termination. "I became a hospice nurse after that," she said quietly. "Figured at least there I could help people die with dignity instead of watching them be murdered." The prosecutor, Ann Valdez, used Nancy's testimony to expand the charges. What had started as fraud and conspiracy became multiple counts of murder. The death penalty was now on the table for the worst offenders. My parents' reaction to the upgraded charges revealed their true nature completely. Catherine tried to blame everything on Robert, claiming she'd been coerced and abused. Robert insisted Catherine had masterminded it all, that he'd just gone along to save their marriage. Their mutual destruction was swift and vicious. But it was a video deposition that provided the most chilling insight. Garrison, their lawyer, revealed conversations where my parents had discussed my fate if the guardianship succeeded. "They talked about keeping her sedated for at least 2 years, he stated. "Long enough to liquidate everything, set up offshore accounts. After that, they discussed options. Catherine favored keeping her institutionalized indefinitely. Robert thought it might be cleaner if she had an accident during treatment. They were still debating when you caught them. Cleaner, as if my death would be nothing more than tidying up loose ends." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every memory of my childhood felt poisoned. Birthday parties where they'd smiled and called me their treasure, while possibly planning eventual theft. Bedtime stories about love and family from people capable of murder. How do you reconcile the parents who taught you to ride a bike with the ones who discussed your disposal like garbage? Jennifer found me on the hotel balcony at 3 a.m. Can't sleep either. I keep thinking about Margaret. She died alone and terrified while they smiled at her funeral and counted their profits. How many others? How many families are built on bones? She didn't have answers because there weren't any. We stood together in silence, two women whose families had chosen money over blood, finding comfort in shared survival. The next morning brought a surprise. Margaret's friend, the one who'd received the smuggled letters, had kept something else. A video message Margaret had recorded on a smuggled phone days before her death. She'd sent it to her friend with instructions to give it to Eleanor if anything happened. Watching Margaret's face, gaunt and trembling, but with eyes still sharp with intelligence, was like seeing a ghost. But her words were clear. "Eleanor, by the time you see this, Robert will have killed me. I'm not crazy despite what they're telling everyone. I'm being murdered for money and I need someone to know the truth. He's not the boy you raised. Something in him is broken evil. Please protect Esther. They'll come for her too when the money runs out. They'll come for anyone who has what they want." The video ended with Margaret looking directly at the camera. "Tell Esther I'm sorry I won't see the woman she becomes. But if she's anything like you, Eleanor, she'll be magnificent." Through my tears, I felt something shift. Margaret and Eleanor had both seen the danger and done everything they could to protect me. They'd gathered evidence, left warnings, created safeguards. Their love had outlasted their lives, reaching past death to shield me from the family they'd seen clearly. The investigation would continue for months. More victims would be found, more families exposed. The network my parents had joined would collapse entirely, its architects facing justice at last. But for me, that moment watching Margaret's video was the turning point. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for her, for Eleanor, for Nancy, who'd tried to help, for every victim whose voice had been silenced by greed. They'd wanted to erase us, to turn us into nothing but bank accounts to plunder. Instead, we'd become an army of truth, each testimony another brick in the prison they'd built for themselves. Margaret was right. We were magnificent in our survival, in our refusal to disappear quietly. And we were just getting started. The arrests happened simultaneously across 3 states at exactly 6 in the morning. I watched from my hotel room as news helicopters captured footage of FBI agents leading my extended family members from their homes in handcuffs. Uncle William in his monogrammed bathrobe, Cousin Dennis still in his golf clothes from an early morning game, Aunt Patricia weeping as her neighbors gathered to stare. But it was the footage from the airport that made headlines worldwide. My parents caught trying to flee to a non-extradition country with fake passports and $2 million in cash hidden in their luggage. The money investigators later confirmed had been borrowed from dangerous people against my expected inheritance. Catherine's mugshot became iconic. Her perfect makeup smeared her expression caught between rage and disbelief. Robert looked smaller somehow, his usual confidence stripped away to reveal the desperate con man beneath. They were held without bail flight risk and danger to the community cited as reasons. The investigation's scope continued expanding. Fletcher's team discovered my parents had formed an actual company, Family Asset Protection LLC, ostensibly for financial planning, but actually a front for their inheritance theft operations. They'd kept meticulous records, apparently planning to franchise their methods to other desperate families. "Your mother was the detail person," Fletcher explained, showing me spreadsheets that made my stomach turn. She tracked everything: which medications worked fastest, which doctors were most easily bribed, which facilities had the loosest oversight. She was building a playbook. Each tab in the spreadsheet represented a life destroyed. Elderly aunts, troubled cousins, anyone with assets and vulnerability. Some marked complete with dollar amounts. Others marked in progress with projected dates. My name was there marked primary target, 20-manner potential. But Catherine had made one crucial error. She'd backed everything up to a cloud service using her real email. When Garrison flipped, he provided passwords. The FBI now had everything: emails, financial records, even photos from celebration dinners after successful acquisitions. One email thread particularly stood out. Catherine writing to Robert, "Esther called today, sounded happy about her promotion. It's getting harder to pretend. Can we move the timeline up? Every time she says, 'I love you,' I want to vomit." The casualness of her cruelty took my breath away. Every "I love you" I'd said had made her physically ill, not from guilt, but from impatience. Mr. Garrison's full confession revealed the network's sophisticated structure. They had tiers of service: basic, document forgery, full commitment packages, and what they called permanent solutions for those willing to pay premium prices. He provided client lists that read like a who's who of society families across the country. We marketed through country clubs, charitable organizations, anywhere wealthy families gathered, he explained in his deposition. Word of mouth from satisfied customers. Having trouble with difficult relatives? We can help. It was all very discreet, very professional. Professional murder packaged with a business card and referral discounts. The trials began 3 months later. The courthouse became a fortress with protesters demanding justice for the victims whose voices had been silenced. Families of the dead held vigils on the steps. Survivors formed support groups in nearby hotels. I testified in 7 different trials, each time reliving the nightmare. But something had changed in me. The terrified woman who'd hidden in a hotel room was gone. In her place stood someone forged by truth and tempered by survival. During my parents' trial, I sat directly behind the prosecutor's table where they had to see me. Catherine tried once to mouth, "I'm sorry," but I turned away. Apologies meant nothing from someone who'd found my love physically revolting. Their defense strategy was mutual destruction. Catherine's lawyer painted Robert as the mastermind, a controlling sociopath who'd forced her participation. Robert's team countered with evidence of Catherine's obsessive planning, her death spreadsheets, her calculated emotional manipulation. My client was trapped in an abusive marriage, Catherine's lawyer argued. She went along out of fear, not greed. The prosecutor, Ann Valdez, destroyed that narrative with a single piece of evidence, a video from Catherine's phone, showing her practicing her concerned mother act in the bathroom mirror, perfecting the tears and trembling voice she'd later use in court. "Does this look like a terrified woman?" Valdez asked the jury, "or does this look like an actress preparing for the performance of her life?" Robert's defense fell apart when investigators found his insurance policy, recordings he'd secretly made of Catherine discussing their plans, apparently intending to use them against her if needed. His willingness to betray his co-conspirator and wife revealed character no jury could sympathize with. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source, Dr. Harrison, who decided to cooperate fully in exchange for protective custody. He revealed there was an entire medical underground supporting these schemes, doctors who'd lost licenses but continued practicing illegally, nurses who'd administer fatal doses for the right price, administrators who'd falsify any record if the payment cleared. It was like a dark web for medical murder, he testified. You could order a diagnosis, a treatment plan, even a death certificate. Everything had a price list. He provided names, dates, amounts. His testimony led to another wave of arrests, including 2 prominent psychiatrists who'd built careers on false commitments. The medical community reeled from the revelations, implementing emergency reforms to prevent future exploitation. During a break in proceedings, Cousin Emma approached me in the hallway. She'd been testifying against her own father, who'd participated in 2 inheritance thefts. "I keep thinking about family dinners," she said quietly. "All of us together laughing and talking while some of them were literally planning murders. How did we not see it?" "Because we couldn't imagine it," I replied. "Normal people don't look at family and see profit opportunities. That blindness isn't weakness, it's humanity." The verdicts came down like dominoes. Catherine and Robert guilty on all counts, including conspiracy to commit murder. Life without parole for both. Their faces as the verdicts were read showed no remorse, only fury at being caught. Uncle William, 30 years for his role in 2 elderly cousins' deaths. Cousin Dennis, 25 years for fraud and attempted murder. Aunt Patricia, 15 years for conspiracy, though she maintained she'd only helped with paperwork, not knowing the full scope. Dr. Harrison received the harshest sentence, death penalty, for his role in 17 confirmed murders. His network of corrupted medical professionals faced similar fates. Willowbrook Psychiatric Facility was shut down. Its administrators imprisoned its patients, transferred to legitimate facilities. But justice for the living couldn't resurrect the dead. Margaret Eleanor's fears realized. 17 others confirmed, with investigations ongoing into dozens more suspicious deaths. Each had been someone's loved one, dismissed as paranoid or delusional while they died. The financial unraveling was equally spectacular. Assets were seized, accounts, frozen, properties auctioned. The millions stolen from victims were tracked through offshore accounts and shell companies, where possible funds were returned to rightful heirs or donated to victims' advocacy groups. My parents' house was sold to pay restitution. I attended the auction, watching strangers bid on the place where I'd grown up, the kitchen where my mother had baked birthday cakes while planning theft, the study where my father had helped with homework while researching commitment procedures, every room a contradiction between the family I'd believed in and the criminals they'd always been. Among their possessions, investigators found something that broke me: a photo album my mother had labeled "Our Greatest Achievement." Inside were pictures of me through the years, first day of school graduation, my promotion celebration. The last photo was recent, taken at a family dinner. Someone, presumably Catherine, had drawn a red circle around my face and written "soon" in the margin. Their greatest achievement. Not raising me, not loving me, but successfully positioning me for harvest. That night, the survivor support group met in a hotel conference room. 12 of us who'd escaped, dozens more who'd lost family members to the network. We shared stories, strategies for healing, resources for rebuilding lives shattered by betrayal. Carol Hendricks spoke about reconnecting with her children. Marcus Chen detailed his fight to reclaim his father's business from his sister. Jennifer had started a foundation to reform guardianship laws, each survivor turning pain into purpose. When my turn came, I talked about the photo album. They documented my whole life like farmers tracking livestock. Every milestone was just me becoming more valuable to them. How do you process that? How do you trust anyone after that? An elderly man named Frank, whose son had tried to have him committed, answered gently, "You start by trusting yourself. You survived because somewhere deep down you knew something was wrong. That instinct, that strength, that's what you build on. The ability to trust others comes back slowly, but it starts with recognizing your own worth beyond what anyone can steal." The meeting ended with a moment of silence for those who hadn't survived. Margaret, whose desperate letters had gone unheard. Frank's brother, who died 2 weeks after commitment. Jennifer's aunt, whose fortune had funded her nephew's business empire. Names and faces representing lives cut short by greed. As we filtered out, Agent Fletcher was waiting. "The investigation is expanding internationally," he told our group. "The network had connections in 12 countries. What you've all done here, your testimony and courage, it's saving lives globally." The words should have felt like victory. Instead, they just emphasized the scope of evil we'd uncovered. How many families worldwide harbored these predators? How many elderly relatives, troubled youth, or vulnerable adults were marked for disposal in spreadsheets? But we'd proven something important: the predators weren't invincible. They'd operated in shadow depending on silence and shame. By speaking truth, by refusing to disappear quietly, we'd dragged them into light, where they withered and died. The network was shattered, its architects imprisoned or executed, its methods exposed. Future predators would think twice knowing survivors were watching, waiting, ready to speak. It wasn't perfect justice. Nothing could restore the dead or erase the betrayal. But it was a beginning. And sometimes, that's all survivors can offer: the promise that others won't suffer in silence, that truth will find its voice, that love, real love, outlasts even the cruelest greed. The full scope of my family's criminal enterprise emerged during what prosecutors called Betrayal Week. 5 days of revelations so shocking that even hardened FBI agents struggled to process them. Each family member who flipped to save themselves revealed new layers of orchestrated evil spanning decades. In a sterile interrogation room, Catherine broke completely when confronted with evidence of her teenage diary discovered in a storage unit. Entries from age 16 detailed her resentment of Eleanor's success and early fantasies about inheriting money. One passage written after Eleanor refused to buy her a luxury car chillingly read, "Mother thinks she'll live forever with her precious money, but everyone dies eventually, and when she does, I'll make sure it all comes to me." "She started planning before I was even born," I told Jennifer as we reviewed the evidence. "My entire existence was just part of a longer con." But Catherine's confessions revealed something worse. The gambling debts that supposedly drove them to desperation, largely fabricated. They had debts, yes, but manageable ones. The $3 million they owed to casino owner Vincent Torino was real, but it wasn't desperation that motivated them. It was greed multiplied by opportunity. "We could have survived without Esther's money," Catherine admitted in her recorded confession. "But why should we just survive when we could thrive? 20 million would set us up for life. Robert had plans, investments, properties, a yacht. We deserved it after raising her." Deserved it, as if 2 decades of parenting were an invoice to be paid with my freedom. Robert's interrogation provided different horrors. He detailed a secret gambling ring among wealthy families where they'd bet on whose inheritance scheme would succeed first. Points were awarded for speed, complexity, and amount stolen. My case was considered a grand slam. Young victim, massive inheritance, perfect timing. It was like fantasy football, but for fraud. Agent Roth explained disgust evident in his voice. They had a private website team rankings, even a trophy for the annual winner. The trophy, when recovered, was engraved with names I recognized from country club rosters and charity galas, pillars of the community who'd turned human misery into sport. But the revelation that shattered my last illusions came from an unlikely source, my parents' marriage counselor, Dr. Patricia Vance, who'd been subpoenaed after investigators found her name in appointment records. They came to me 15 years ago. She testified clearly uncomfortable, not for marriage issues, but for what they called alignment sessions. They wanted to ensure they stayed coordinated in their long-term goals. Those goals, documented in her notes under the guise of financial planning, were a roadmap for systematic exploitation of every family member with assets. They'd ranked relatives by net worth, health status, and vulnerability. I'd been marked as primary long-term since age 13. "Did you report this?" the prosecutor asked. Report what they used coded language never said anything explicitly illegal. I thought they were just very focused on financial security. The investigation into Vincent Torino, the casino owner they owed money to, revealed the darkest secret yet. He wasn't just a creditor. He was a partner. The casino debt was partially staged, creating urgency to justify quick action against me. In return for his cooperation, my parents promised him a percentage of my inheritance. Torino's arrest led to his own spectacular confession. He ran what he called a full-service solution for problem heirs. Gambling debts to create pressure connections to corrupt medical professionals, even suggestions for accidents if legal methods failed. My parents were one of 12 families using his services. "Your parents were amateurs at first," Torino said during his deposition, chain-smoking despite his lawyer's protests. "But they learned fast, Catherine especially. She had real talent for this work. Cold as winter, that one." The compliment made me physically ill. Emma, still reeling from her father's arrest, helped investigators access family photo archives that revealed disturbing patterns. Pictures from family gatherings showed my parents consistently positioned near elderly relatives who later died mysteriously. In group photos, they often stood behind their future victims, hands on shoulders in gestures that now seemed possessive rather than affectionate. One photo particularly haunted me: Aunt Margaret's 70th birthday, 6 months before her commitment. My parents flanked her, smiling broadly while she looked small and fragile between them. Robert's hand rested on her shoulder, but examining closely, you could see his fingers digging in slightly, a grip rather than a touch. Catherine held Margaret's arm in what appeared affectionate support, but now looked like restraint. "They were already holding her prisoner," Emma said quietly. "We just couldn't see it." The financial investigation uncovered overseas accounts in Switzerland, the Caymans, and Panama. But these weren't simple hiding spots for stolen money. They were part of an international network moving inheritance theft profits globally. My family's business had connections to similar operations in Europe and Asia. One account, labeled Futures, contained detailed plans for expansion. They'd intended to franchise their methods, selling packages to desperate families worldwide. Training materials were already created, including videos of Catherine explaining how to recognize vulnerable relatives and Robert demonstrating emotional manipulation techniques. "They were building an empire of elder abuse," Fletcher said, showing us the business plan they'd drafted. "Your inheritance wasn't an end goal. It was startup capital for something much worse." Among the evidence was a recorded phone call between my parents from a week before my grandmother's death. They discussed their disappointment that Eleanor remained sharp and healthy, debating whether to accelerate the timeline. The call ended with Robert saying, "Well, if she won't go naturally, maybe she needs help. We've waited long enough." Eleanor had died of a heart attack 3 days later. The investigation immediately expanded to include her death exhumation orders, filed within hours. But perhaps the most chilling discovery came from my childhood bedroom, which investigators had thoroughly searched. Hidden inside my old teddy bear, they found a recording device. My parents had been recording me since high school gathering material for future use, conversations with friends about stress breakups that left me crying any moment of vulnerability. all preserved for potential evidence of instability. "They turned your entire life into surveillance footage," Jennifer said as we reviewed the list of recordings. "Every moment of pain was just ammunition to them." The bear had been a gift for my 13th birthday. I remembered Catherine insisting I keep it on my bed, even as I outgrew stuffed animals, saying it was sentimental to her. Now I knew why. The prosecutor used these revelations to paint a picture for the jury, a family that was actually a criminal organization, parents who were actually predators, a home that was actually a hunting ground. Every birthday was reconnaissance. Every hug was positioning. Every "I love you" was a lie maintaining cover. During the trial, a moment of unexpected drama occurred when Robert suddenly stood and pointed at Catherine. It was all her. "She's the mastermind. I just wanted a normal life, but she corrupted me with her greed." Catherine's response was immediate and vicious. "Normal life? You were placing bets on which uncle would die first before we even met. I have recordings, you pathetic worm." They had to be physically separated as they screamed accusations, each revealing more crimes in their desperation to shift blame. The judge cleared the courtroom, but not before everyone saw their true faces, not loving parents driven to desperation, but apex predators turning on each other when cornered. Their mutual destruction was complete. Catherine revealed Robert had killed his first wife 20 years ago, staging a car accident for insurance money. Robert countered with evidence that Catherine had poisoned her own father slowly over 2 years, testing methods she'd later perfect. Each revelation spawned new investigations, new charges, new horrors. By the week's end, the Matthews family tree looked like a murder map. 17 confirmed victims over 40 years, with investigations ongoing into dozens more suspicious deaths across the extended family. We weren't a family. We were a multi-generational criminal syndicate specializing in murdering our own. The media dubbed it the family that prayed together, but cute headlines couldn't capture the scope of evil uncovered. Every family reunion had been a hunting ground, every wedding and funeral a networking opportunity for killers, every new baby a potential future victim or perpetrator depending on their eventual net worth. I sat with the other survivors as the verdicts were read. Life sentences rained down like hammering nails in coffins. Catherine and Robert would die in prison, along with 14 other family members. Some received lesser sentences for cooperation, but none would walk free for decades. But justice felt hollow when weighed against the scope of loss. 17 confirmed dead, countless others whose deaths were now suspicious but unprovable. Families destroyed trust, shattered love, revealed as camouflage for predation. "How do you process this?" Carol asked our support group that night. "How do you accept that people capable of this share your DNA?" The group therapist herself, a survivor of family fraud, answered carefully. "You don't process it all at once. Trauma, this deep betrayal, this complete, it's not something you overcome. It's something you learn to carry. Some days it's heavier than others, but you're not carrying it alone anymore." She was right. We were a strange family now, bonded not by blood but by survival. We understood each other's nightmares, validated each other's struggles to trust celebrated small victories, like sleeping through the night or accepting genuine kindness without suspicion. As the trials concluded and sentences were handed down, I thought about grandmother Eleanor's letter. She'd known what they were, but loved me enough to prepare me for battle rather than abandon me to wolves. Her love, Margaret's desperate warnings, Nancy's risky truth-telling. These were the family legacy I chose to claim. The monsters who'd raised me were heading to prison. The network they'd built was destroyed. The victims they'd silenced would be remembered. And I would use every penny of the inheritance they'd tried to steal to ensure no other family could turn love into a weapon. The secrets were all in the open. Now every hidden horror dragged into light. There would be more revelations as investigations continued, more victims discovered, more connections mapped. But the fundamental truth was clear. I'd survived a family of killers, and their failure to destroy me had destroyed them instead. That had to count for something. Even in the darkest revelation of family secrets, survival itself was a form of victory. The story of our survival spread across news networks like wildfire, each outlet adding their own sensational spin. The inheritance murders. Family predators exposed. When blood turns bad. Headlines that reduced our trauma to clickbait. But among the noise came voices that mattered, other survivors reaching out desperate to be heard. My new apartment, secured under an alias for safety, became an unofficial headquarters for what would become the National Alliance for Guardianship Abuse Survivors. The acronym NAGAS wasn't elegant, but Jennifer pointed out it meant serpent in Sanskrit, appropriate for those who'd survived being devoured by family snakes. The first meeting drew 12 people to my living room. By the third week, we'd outgrown the space and rented a community center. By month 2, we had chapters forming in 6 states. The need was staggering, the silence around family-perpetrated fraud finally breaking. Marcus Chen became our unofficial technical director. His wife's family had tried to steal his software company by claiming his depression made him unfit to run it. He'd fought back through technology, documenting everything, creating digital trails they couldn't erase. Now he built our website, encrypted communication systems, and databases tracking guardianship abuse patterns nationwide. My therapist says I'm channeling trauma into purpose, he explained while setting up our first video conference system. But honestly, I just want to make sure nobody else has to prove their sanity while their family robs them blind. Carol Hendricks took charge of family reconciliation support. Her journey with her children, Tyler and Megan, from estrangement to healing, became our template for those trying to rebuild relationships after fraud tore families apart. Not everyone could reconcile. Some wounds cut too deep. But for those who wanted to try, Carol offered roadmaps through the minefield of mistrust. The hardest part, she told our group during an evening session, is accepting that the person who hurt you and the person seeking forgiveness are the same. Tyler and Megan believed their father's lies chose his version of reality over mine. But they were victims too manipulated by someone they trusted. Healing means holding both truths. Our meetings followed a structure born from necessity. First, new members shared their stories without interruption. The similarities were haunting gaslighting, isolation, forged documents, complicit professionals. But each story had unique cruelties, personalized betrayals that revealed how intimately predators knew their victims. Sandra Williams, 72, had been committed by her son when she refused to sell her brownstone. He documented her grief after her husband's death as psychosis, her tears as instability. She'd spent 6 months drugged in a facility before a sympathetic janitor helped her contact a lawyer. The drugs made everything fuzzy. She said, her dignity intact despite trembling hands. But I never forgot who I was. Every day I'd repeat my name, my address, my social security number. They could steal my freedom, but not my identity. James Ortiz discovered his brothers had been planning his commitment since he came out as gay. They'd collected evidence of his lifestyle, photos from pride parades, dating app profiles, to paint him as sexually deviant and mentally unstable. His inheritance from their grandfather was the real target, but homophobia provided convenient cover. They used my truth against me, he said, wearing his pride pin defiantly. Every moment of joy, every authentic expression became evidence of sickness in their files. But I'm here, I'm queer, and I got their asses sent to prison. So who's unstable now? Week after week, stories poured out. Daughters betrayed by mothers, husbands by wives, siblings destroying siblings. The trust that made families function became the weapon turned against us. But in sharing, we found patterns. Warning signs emerged, protective strategies developed, survival tactics documented. Our legal advisor, Patricia Okonkwo, who'd first helped Jennifer, created template documents, how to file complaints, request investigations, protect assets preemptively. She ran workshops on recognizing early warning signs, documenting suspicious behavior, creating legal safeguards before crisis hit. The law assumes families act in good faith, she explained during one session. That assumption is what predators exploit. We need to change laws, but until then, we arm ourselves with knowledge. The knowledge was practical and painful. Never give family members medical power of attorney without strict limitations. Document everything, even casual conversations about money or health. Keep copies of documents in multiple secure locations. Trust, but verify, especially when significant assets are involved. But beyond practical advice, we offered something invaluable: belief. Every new member arrived expecting skepticism, having been dismissed as paranoid by authorities, friends, even therapists. In our rooms, no story was too outlandish because we'd lived through the impossible ourselves. One evening, a young woman named Amy Chen, no relation to Marcus, appeared at our door, shaking and clutching printed emails. Her parents, both respected physicians, were building a case to have her committed. She'd discovered their plans accidentally while helping her mother with computer issues. "Everyone says I'm overreacting," she whispered. "My therapist thinks I'm having paranoid delusions. My boyfriend says I need to communicate better with them. But I saw the emails. They're discussing which facility has the best security, how to make sure I can't contact anyone outside." Jennifer and I exchanged glances, remembering our own frantic discovery phases. We spent hours with Amy reviewing the emails, confirming the patterns we knew too well. Real paranoia doesn't produce detailed documentation. Parents planning commitment don't usually discuss security unless they know their child will resist. "Your parents are doctors?" Patricia asked, already taking notes. "That makes this federal. Medical professionals crossing state lines to commit fraud is FBI jurisdiction. We can stop this before it starts." Amy's relief was physical, her body sagging as months of gaslighting-induced doubt finally lifted. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't overreacting. She was in danger, but now she wasn't alone. Agent Fletcher became our unofficial liaison to law enforcement, attending monthly meetings to update us on ongoing investigations and learn about new cases. The network my parents had joined was dismantled, but smaller operations sprouted like weeds. Each story we collected became intelligence in an ongoing war against inheritance predators. "You've created something unprecedented," Fletcher told us after one particularly intense session, where 3 new members detailed active threats. "A survivor network that's also an early warning system. We've prevented 14 attempted commitments based on intelligence from this group." Prevention became our secondary mission after support. Marcus developed an app allowing potential victims to document suspicious behavior securely, with automatic backup to encrypted servers and alert systems for trusted contacts. Carol created educational materials for elder care facilities, teaching staff to recognize signs of fraudulent commitments. I worked with journalists to keep public attention on the issue, ensuring our stories couldn't be buried or forgotten. But growth brought challenges. Infiltration attempts by families seeking information about escaped victims, death threats against vocal members, legal harassment from exposed perpetrators claiming defamation. We adapted, implementing security protocols, vetting procedures, legal protections. The most unexpected challenge came from within. A member named Douglas Freeman had presented himself as a victim of his children's greed. His story was convincing, his pain seemingly genuine. For 3 months he attended meetings, offered support, gained trust. Then Margaret Yates, our eldest member at 81, mentioned keeping her will in her home safe. Douglas offered to help her set up better security. 2 days later, Margaret's neighbor called police after seeing Douglas trying to break into her house. His real name was Douglas Garrison, nephew of my parents' lawyer attempting to infiltrate our group to find new victims. The betrayal shook us deeply. We'd created a sanctuary only to have a predator slip inside. But Margaret's sharp instincts had saved her. She'd given Douglas a fake address, suspecting something off about his eager helpfulness. Her survival skills, honed by previous betrayal, protected her when our screening failed. "Trust takes time to rebuild," she told our emergency meeting after Douglas's arrest. "But we can't let fear close us off. Every predator we expose protects countless potential victims. Yes, they'll try to infiltrate, but we're not helpless targets anymore. We're survivors who've learned to bite back. We implemented stricter security measures, but kept our doors open. The need was too great, the silence around family fraud too deadly. Every week brought new members, new stories, new evidence that inheritance predators operated in every economic class, every culture, every type of family. 6 months after our founding, we held our first national conference. 200 survivors gathered in a hotel ballroom that required security sweeps and background checks for all attendees. The media was barred. This was for us, by us, about us. The keynote speaker was Dr. Helen Marshall, a psychiatrist who'd spent 5 years institutionalized by her brother before escaping. She'd lost her practice, her reputation, her savings, but she'd survived and now counseled other medical professionals on recognizing fraudulent commitment attempts. They target our credibility first, she explained to the packed room, make us sound unstable, so when we report their crimes, we're already discredited. But credibility isn't just professional standing. It's the truth we carry, the reality we lived. They can't steal that unless we let them. Workshops covered everything from asset protection to trauma therapy, legal resources, to rebuilding credit after financial abuse. But the most powerful sessions were the small support circles where survivors connected over shared experiences. A daughter betrayed by her mother found comfort with another woman who'd survived the same. Elderly victims discovered they weren't foolish for trusting family, but targeted precisely because they loved unconditionally. The conference ended with a candlelight vigil for those who hadn't survived. Margaret, whose desperate letters saved me. The 17 victims of my family's network. Hundreds more whose deaths were suspicious but unprovable. Each flame represented a life stolen but also truth illuminated. Their deaths hadn't been in vain if we could prevent others. As candles flickered in the darkened ballroom, I thought about how far we'd come from that terrifying morning when I discovered my parents' betrayal. The woman who'd hidden in hotel rooms had become someone who stood before crowds, speaking truth. The isolation they'd tried to impose had transformed into connection with hundreds who understood. But more importantly, we'd proven something vital: survival was possible. Truth could prevail. Families who prayed together could be stopped by those who chose to survive together. The network my grandmother feared had destroyed her was gone. In its place stood our network, not of predators but protectors, not of thieves but truth-tellers. We couldn't resurrect the dead or undo betrayals, but we could ensure their tactics were exposed, their hunting grounds watched, their future victims warned and armed. As people filtered out exchanging contact information and promises of support, Amy Chen approached. The terrified young woman who'd arrived weeks earlier now stood straight, her parents' commitment attempt thwarted, her freedom secured. "Thank you," she said simply. "You saved my life." "No," I corrected gently. "You saved your own life by seeking help. We just reminded you that you weren't crazy." She smiled, understanding passing between us. That reminder, you're not crazy, you're in danger, but you're not alone, was perhaps the greatest gift survivors could offer each other. The support network would continue growing, spreading across states, and eventually internationally. We'd face setbacks, infiltration attempts, legal challenges. Some members would heal and move on, needing us less. Others would arrive fresh from trauma, desperate for belief. But the foundation was solid now, built not on blood ties that could betray, but on shared survival that bonded deeper than DNA. We were the family we'd chosen, the protection we'd needed, the voices that refused to be silenced. And in that hotel ballroom, surrounded by candlelight and fellow survivors, I felt what had seemed impossible during those terrifying early days: hope. Not just for justice or healing, but for a future where family predators would think twice, knowing survivors were watching, waiting, and ready to protect each other. The war against inheritance predators was far from over, but for the first time, we weren't fighting alone. The federal courthouse in downtown became my second home over the following months as trial after trial demanded testimony. Each case peeled back new layers of horror, but also revealed the systematic nature of inheritance fraud across America. What had started as my family's prosecution became a national reckoning with predatory guardianship. The main event was United States versus Matthews et al., combining charges against 23 defendants, including my parents. The prosecution team, led by Ann Valdez, had assembled over 10,000 pieces of evidence. The defense table looked like a law firm convention, each predator represented by attorneys scrambling to distance their clients from the others. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Valdez began her opening statement. You're about to hear evidence of a conspiracy so cruel, so calculated, that it challenges our basic assumptions about family bonds. These defendants didn't just steal money. They stole freedom, dignity, and in too many cases lives themselves. The prosecution's strategy was methodical brilliance. Rather than presenting cases individually, they showed the network as an organism, each defendant, a vital organ in a body designed for exploitation. Financial records revealed money flowing between conspirators like blood through veins. Shared documents showed standardized methods passed between families like genetic code. I testified on day 3, spending 7 hours on the stand. The defense attorneys attacked like pack hunters, each trying to discredit me in different ways. Catherine's lawyer suggested I was motivated by greed, wanting my inheritance without sharing. Robert's attorney painted me as mentally fragile, traumatized into paranoia. Other defenders tried portraying me as a vengeful daughter destroying innocent families. But Patricia had prepared me well. Stay calm. Stick to facts. Let evidence speak louder than emotions. When Catherine's lawyer suggested I'd fabricated evidence, I simply directed him to the FBI's digital forensics report. When Robert's attorney questioned my mental stability, I cited the 3 independent psychiatrists who'd evaluated and cleared me. Miss Matthews, one defender asked smugly, isn't it true you've profited from this situation? Book deals, speaking fees, a foundation receiving donations. Every dollar has gone to supporting other survivors, I replied evenly. Unlike your client, I don't profit from family betrayal. The jury's faces told the story. Initial skepticism melted as evidence mounted. Recorded conversations where defendants discussed victims like livestock, emails celebrating successful commitments with champagne emojis, photos from what they'd called harvest parties after stealing inheritances. Jennifer testified the following week, her brother's defense attorney trying to paint her as bitter about family business disputes. But Jennifer had receipts. Literally. She'd kept every document recorded, every threat photographed, every forged paper. Her methodical presentation destroyed any claim of sibling rivalry gone wrong. He offered me $20,000 to disappear, she stated, showing the jury a recorded conversation. Said it would be easier than commitment but messier if I refused. That's when I knew he'd already decided to destroy me. The only question was method. But it was testimony from perpetrators turned state's evidence that truly shocked the courtroom. Garrison, my parents' lawyer, detailed the network structure with corporate efficiency. He'd brought flowcharts showing referral systems, training documents for new conspirators, even performance metrics, tracking successful frauds. We had quotas. He explained, stunning the jury. Each lawyer was expected to facilitate at least 3 successful guardianships annually. There were bonuses for commitments that lasted over a year, penalties for escapees. Escapees, like we were prisoners of war rather than family members. Dr. Harrison's testimony delivered from protective custody revealed the medical side's horrifying scope. He named 47 doctors across 12 states who'd participated. Some just signed papers for quick cash. Others actively drugged victims, ensuring they appeared mentally ill during evaluations. A few, he admitted with disturbing casualness, had administered fatal doses when families paid premium prices. The going rate for a signature was $5,000, he stated. Ongoing treatment could net $20,000 monthly. Terminal solutions started at $100,000 depending on complexity and risk. Terminal solutions. Murder marketed like a service package. The defense cases were studies in desperation. Some defendants claimed ignorance, insisting they genuinely believed relatives needed help. Others blamed each other, families fracturing under legal pressure. A few tried justifying their actions, arguing elderly relatives were better off in care facilities anyway. My mother's defense was particularly pathetic. Her attorney presented her as a devoted mother driven to extremes by financial pressure and Robert's manipulation. They showed photos of her at my school events cards she'd written for birthdays, testimony from her book club about what a caring person she seemed. But the prosecution's rebuttal was devastating. They played recordings of Catherine coaching witnesses on lying, showed her death spreadsheets. With their cold calculations presented evidence that she'd been planning to steal from me since before my birth. The book club members who'd testified for her looked sick when they learned she'd been evaluating them for potential exploitation, too. Robert's defense took a different approach: mental illness. His attorneys argued he suffered from antisocial personality disorder, unable to form genuine emotional connections. It was an ironic strategy, claiming mental illness to avoid punishment for fraudulently claiming others were mentally ill. The prosecution's expert witness demolished this defense. Antisocial personality disorder doesn't make someone create elaborate inheritance theft schemes. It might reduce empathy, but it doesn't force criminal behavior. The defendant chose his actions, recruited partners, and showed clear understanding of right and wrong by hiding his crimes. Week 3 brought testimony from victims who'd survived commitment. Sandra Williams described months of forced medication that left her unable to think clearly. James Ortiz detailed sexual orientation, treatments his brothers had ordered, hoping to break his spirit along with stealing his inheritance. Each survivor's story added weight to charges showing the human cost beyond financial theft. Margaret Yates, our eldest support group member, testified with quiet dignity about discovering her nephew's plans to have her committed. I started sleeping with my important papers, afraid someone would steal them while I slept. At 81, I was barricading my bedroom door, terrified of the boy I'd helped raise. No amount of money can restore that sense of safety. The medical professionals' trials ran concurrently, revealing an entire shadow healthcare system. Doctors who'd lost licenses in one state simply moved to another. Facilities advertised their flexibility regarding admissions. Insurance companies were complicit, approving claims for fictitious treatments because families paid premiums. One facility administrator broke down on the stand, admitting they'd had awards specifically for inheritance victims. We called it the Golden Wing, patients whose families paid extra for extended stays regardless of medical necessity. Some were there for years, perfectly sane but unable to prove it. The revelation sparked immediate investigations into every facility named. Within days, dozens of patients were freed, blinking in sunlight after years of unnecessary confinement. Their testimonies added to the growing mountain of evidence against the network. As trials progressed, the financial scope became clearer. Forensic accountants traced over $300 million stolen through fraudulent guardianships. The money had funded lavish lifestyles, business ventures, and political donations to candidates who opposed guardianship reform. One shocking revelation came when investigators found several state legislators had received campaign contributions from the network. These politicians had consistently blocked reforms that would have made inheritance fraud harder. While not criminally charged, their careers ended in scandal as constituents learned they'd been funded by family predators. The verdicts came down over several weeks each, adding to the total justice. Of 23 main defendants, 21 were convicted on all counts. 2 received reduced sentences for cooperation, though they'd still die in prison. Catherine and Robert both received life without parole, their dreams of yacht-funded retirement replaced by concrete cells. The medical professionals faced their own reckoning. 34 doctors lost licenses permanently. 18 received prison sentences, ranging from 10 years to life. 7 facilities were shuttered, their administrators imprisoned. The shadow healthcare system that had enabled inheritance fraud was systematically destroyed. But justice extended beyond criminal courts. Civil lawsuits proliferated as victims sought recovery of stolen assets. Insurance companies faced massive penalties for approving fraudulent claims. Professional boards revoked licenses for lawyers, accountants, and therapists who'd participated even peripherally. The day Catherine and Robert were formally sentenced, I attended court one final time. They were brought in separately, no longer the united front they'd presented. Catherine had aged decades in months, her perfect appearance replaced by gray roots and orange jumpsuit reality. Robert seemed to have shrunk, his commanding presence reduced to shuffling steps and downcast eyes. Judge Chen allowed victim impact statements. I'd prepared remarks but found myself speaking from the heart instead. You raised me to believe in family and love and trust. Then you used those beliefs as weapons against me. You didn't just try to steal money. You tried to steal my identity, my freedom, my faith in humanity itself. But you failed because the love you faked others gave genuinely. The family you perverted survivors created anew. You're going to prison, but I'm free, and I'll spend that freedom ensuring no other parent can do what you tried. Catherine tried to respond, perhaps to apologize or manipulate one last time, but the judge cut her off. The defendants have said enough. This court has heard extensive evidence of calculated cruelty spanning decades. Life without parole is the only appropriate sentence. May God have mercy on your souls, because this court will not. The gavel fell with finality. My parents were led away in shackles, their $1 million defense reduced to nothing. In the gallery, other survivors watched their own predators receive justice. We'd won more than individual cases. We'd exposed and destroyed a system that had operated in shadow for generations. Outside, the courthouse media waited with questions, but I walked past them to where our support group had gathered. These were my people, now bonded by survival rather than blood. Together, we'd transformed personal trauma into systemic change. The legal battles would continue with appeals, new cases, ongoing investigations. But the precedent was set. Inheritance fraud was no longer a family secret, but a federal crime. Predatory guardianship was exposed as systematic abuse. Families who prayed together would be prosecuted together. Justice isn't healing, and verdicts don't erase betrayal. But that day, watching predators exchange family homes for prison cells, seeing survivors stand together in strength rather than isolation, I felt something shift in the world. We'd proven that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, that family can be weapon or shield depending on who wields it. Most importantly, we'd shown that survivors, when they unite, become an unstoppable force for truth. The war against inheritance predators would continue beyond these trials, but we'd won the first major battle, and in doing so, rewrote the rules of engagement. Families who considered preying on their own now knew the consequences. Survivors who'd been silenced now had voices amplified by law. As I left the courthouse for the last time, I thought of Grandmother Eleanor and Aunt Margaret. They died fighting alone against family predators. But their fight hadn't been in vain. Their truth had survived. Their warnings had saved me, and through me, countless others. The legal system had finally caught up to what they'd known all along. Sometimes the greatest threat comes from those who claim to love you most. But armed with that knowledge, protected by law, and supported by fellow survivors, we could face even that threat and win. The verdicts had been read, the sentences pronounced, but the true reckoning came in the quiet moments that followed. As news of the conspiracy's full scope reached the public, families across the nation were forced to confront uncomfortable questions about their own dynamics. The Matthews case had become a mirror, and many didn't like what they saw reflected. For my extended family, the reckoning was particularly brutal. Those who'd escaped prosecution still faced social exile. Cousin Patricia's children discovered their college funds had been built on stolen inheritances. Uncle William's business partners severed ties, unwilling to associate with someone connected to the scandal. Family members who'd been peripheral to the conspiracy found themselves investigating their own histories, terrified of what they might discover. Emma became the unofficial family archaeologist, digging through records with obsessive determination. What she found painted a portrait of generational predation dating back 60 years. Great uncles who died mysteriously young, leaving fortunes to siblings. Cousins who'd been institutionalized for nervousness in the 1960s, never to be seen again. A pattern of erased relatives, each disappearance, followed by someone else's financial windfall. "We weren't a family," Emma told me during one of our carefully arranged meetings. "We were a hunting ground that occasionally gathered for holidays." The discoveries sparked a civil war among surviving relatives. Some demanded full investigations into every suspicious death, wanting complete transparency, regardless of consequences. Others begged to let sleeping ghosts lie terrified of losing what little family remained. The Matthews name became so toxic that several cousins legally changed theirs, desperate to distance themselves from the legacy of murder and theft. But our family's reckoning was just one ripple in a nationwide wave. The Guardian Abuse Prevention Act fast-tracked through Congress after public outcry mandated federal oversight of all guardianship proceedings involving significant assets. The Harrison Registry, named after the corrupt doctor, required all psychiatric professionals involved in competency hearings to register federally with their histories publicly searchable. The insurance industry faced its own reckoning as investigations revealed systematic approval of fraudulent claims. Major companies paid billions in settlements to victims who'd been wrongfully committed and forcibly medicated. New regulations required multiple independent evaluations for any mental health commitment, lasting over 72 hours with automatic reviews by patient advocates. The medical community underwent painful self-examination. The American Psychiatric Association launched a comprehensive review of ethical guidelines implementing new safeguards against financial conflicts of interest. Medical schools added mandatory courses on recognizing and reporting guardianship abuse. Hospitals created independent review boards for all involuntary commitments. For survivors, the reckoning was deeply personal. Years of gaslighting and betrayal don't vanish with verdicts. Our support group sessions became intensive therapy as members processed what justice meant when it couldn't restore lost years or resurrect the dead. Carol Hendricks struggled with her children's guilt. Tyler and Megan had testified against their father, helping send him to prison. But the weight of having believed his lies about their mother nearly crushed them. They attended every meeting, listening to other survivors trying to understand how they'd been manipulated into becoming unwitting accomplices. "I wrote terrible things about Mom in my diary," Megan confessed during one session. "Dad would ask what I thought about her episodes, and I'd document things that never happened, influenced by his suggestions. Those diary entries became evidence against her. How do you forgive yourself for that?" Carol's response showed enormous grace. "You were a child trusting your parent. The guilt belongs to him, not you. We rebuild from here with truth as our foundation." Marcus Chen faced a different challenge. His wife's family's attempts to steal his company had failed, but the betrayal poisoned every memory of their marriage. During divorce proceedings, he discovered she'd been documenting his depression treatment from the beginning, building a case for years before attempting to strike. "Every time she comforted me during a bad period, she was taking notes," he said, voice hollow. "Every supportive word was reconnaissance. How do you trust anyone after that?" The answer we discovered together was slowly and carefully. Trust could be rebuilt, but required constant vigilance. We developed strategies for protecting ourselves while remaining open to genuine connection. Background checks on romantic partners became normal. Prenuptials addressing guardianship were standard. Some called us paranoid, but we called it survival. For me, the personal reckoning centered on identity. If everything my parents had shown me was performance, who was I really? Nature versus nurture became an urgent question when nurture was revealed as predation. I underwent extensive therapy, excavating authentic memories from manufactured ones. Dr. Sarah Winters, a specialist in betrayal trauma, helped me navigate the maze. Children of predators often struggle with inherited traits, she explained. You look for signs of their coldness in yourself, terrified of becoming them. But recognition is your greatest protection. The fact that their actions horrify you proves you're not them. Still, I found myself obsessively analyzing my behavior. Was my anger at them justified or excessive? Did my leadership in the survivor community stem from genuine desire to help or inherited need to control? Every emotion faced scrutiny through the lens of potential inherited sociopathy. The answer came from an unexpected source. While reviewing evidence for ongoing investigations, I found a video from my 5th birthday party. Catherine and Robert were performing their loving parent roles perfectly, but 5-year-old me was the revelation. In the video, I noticed another child crying because they'd dropped their cake. Without prompting, I offered them half of mine. "That's who you are," Dr. Winters said when I showed her. "Before you knew to perform, before they could fully shape you, your instinct was kindness. They couldn't corrupt that core." The support group evolved as members progressed through stages of healing. Initial meetings focused on crisis management and practical protection. Later sessions explored deeper questions of identity forgiveness and building lives after betrayal. We developed a structured program for new members, pairing them with those further along in recovery. Jennifer emerged as a particularly gifted counselor. Her analytical nature, which had helped her document her brother's crimes, translated into creating systematic healing approaches. She developed workshops on financial self-protection, emotional boundary setting, and recognizing manipulation tactics. "We're like abuse survivors who happen to be wealthy," she explained during one session. "The money complicates things, but at core, we're healing from intimate betrayal. The principles are the same, the scale is just different." Our influence spread beyond individual healing. Law schools began inviting us to lecture on guardianship abuse. Medical conferences featured panels on ethical considerations, incompetency evaluations. Financial planning associations created new guidelines for protecting vulnerable clients from family predation. One particularly meaningful development was the Eleanor Matthews Memorial Fund, established with part of my inheritance. It provided free legal representation for suspected guardianship abuse victims. Within its first year, the fund helped liberate 37 wrongfully committed individuals and prevented dozens more attempts. The fund's first major success was freeing William Chang, a tech entrepreneur whose siblings had him committed after he refused to share a patent worth millions. He'd spent 2 years in a facility diagnosed with disorders that shifted depending on what insurance would cover. His liberation made national news, putting faces to the statistics of guardianship abuse. 2 years of my life gone, William said at our press conference. 2 years of forced medication, of being told my memories were delusions, of watching my life's work stolen. But I survived, and now I'll make sure others don't suffer the same. The ripple effects continued. Dating apps added options for survivors to disclose their experiences safely. Therapists specializing in betrayal trauma couldn't keep up with demand. Publishers courted survivors for memoirs, though most of us remained focused on healing rather than publicity. Not all reckonings were public. I received letters from family members I'd never known existed, relatives who'd cut ties with the Matthews clan decades earlier, after sensing something wrong. They shared their own stories of narrow escapes of choosing poverty over participation in family crimes. One letter particularly moved me, from a second cousin named David who'd been disowned 40 years earlier for refusing to participate in scamming his grandmother. He'd lived modestly but honestly, watching from afar as the family's criminal empire grew. "I always wondered if I'd made the right choice," he wrote. "Seeing you expose them, seeing justice finally come, I know I did. You've given us refugees from the family a voice at last." The corporate world faced its own reckoning as shareholders demanded accountability. Companies discovered employees who'd gained positions through inherited wealth from guardianship abuse. Some firms conducted internal audits terrified of association with blood money. A few executives quietly resigned rather than face scrutiny of their family fortunes. Religious communities struggled with reconciliation. Many perpetrators had been prominent members, their donations funding buildings and programs. Churches faced impossible choices between returning tainted money and maintaining operations. Some created restitution funds redirecting donations from perpetrator families toward victim support. The psychological community published papers on what they termed predatory family syndrome, recognizing it as a distinct form of intergenerational trauma. Symptoms included hypervigilance around family difficulty, accepting gifts, and obsessive documentation of interactions. They estimated thousands of Americans suffered from it, most undiagnosed. As the one-year anniversary of my parents' arrest approached, the Department of Justice released comprehensive statistics. The investigation had led to 237 convictions across 19 states. Over $400 million in stolen assets had been recovered. More than 1,000 wrongfully committed individuals had been freed. But numbers couldn't capture the human impact. Families destroyed and rebuilt. Truths revealed and lies exposed. Lives saved and lost. The reckoning had touched every corner of American society, forcing uncomfortable conversations about family money and the dangerous intersection between them. For survivors, the reckoning was ongoing. Each day brought new challenges in rebuilding lives and identities. Some days were harder than others when trust felt impossible and isolation seemed safer than risk. But we faced them together, bonded by shared understanding that family could wound and heal, depending on how we defined it. The true reckoning wasn't in courtroom verdicts or legislative changes. It was in quiet moments when we chose trust over fear connection, over isolation, healing over hatred. It was in building new families of choice, creating safety nets of mutual support, refusing to let predators' actions define our capacity for love. As I stood before our support group on that anniversary, looking at faces that had become family, I realized the reckoning had transformed us all. We'd entered as victims, but emerged as advocates. We'd arrived broken, but were rebuilding stronger. We'd been targeted for our vulnerability, but had discovered unshakable strength. They tried to erase us, I told the group. Instead, they created an army of survivors who will ensure no family predator operates in shadow again. That's our reckoning, our victory. Not just that they were caught, but that we caught them. Not just that they were stopped, but that we'll stop others. Not just that we survived, but that we're living proof that survival is possible. The room erupted in applause, but it wasn't celebration. It was recognition, acknowledgement of how far we'd come and how far we'd go. The reckoning wasn't over. It had just begun, and we were ready for whatever came next. 5 years had passed since that terrifying morning when I discovered my parents' betrayal. 5 years of legal battles, therapy sessions, and the slow, painful work of rebuilding a life from the rubble of deception. The woman I'd become bore little resemblance to the trusting daughter who'd walked into a psychiatric evaluation, unaware she was prey. My new home, purchased with the inheritance my parents had tried to steal, was nothing like the grand estate grandmother Eleanor had left. Instead, I'd chosen a modest craftsman house with a garden that reminded me of her, where she'd taught me that beautiful things could grow even in difficult soil. The security system was state-of-the-art but hidden. I refused to live in a visible fortress. Therapy had become as routine as breathing. Dr. Winters guided me through the labyrinth of complex PTSD, helping me distinguish between necessary caution and paralyzing paranoia. We'd worked through the stages denial that my parents could be evil anger that threatened to consume me, bargaining with reality depression that made rising from bed feel impossible, and finally, acceptance that began the real healing. Acceptance doesn't mean forgiveness, Dr. Winters clarified during one session. It means acknowledging reality without letting it destroy you. Your parents were predators. That's fact. How you live with that fact is choice. The choice manifested in ways both small and profound. I'd kept my name, refusing to let them steal that too, but I'd changed everything else. Appearance habits, even food preferences that reminded me of family dinners that were actually intelligence-gathering sessions. Creating new traditions untainted by their manipulation became essential to recovery. Romance had seemed impossible initially. How could I trust anyone when those who'd claimed to love me most had planned my destruction? Daniel entered my life through the Survivor Network initially as a fellow advocate. His wife had tried to have him committed to steal his restaurant chain. He understood the hypervigilance, the document obsession, the way I needed to verify everything twice. Our first date wasn't dinner or movies, but reviewing each other's background checks. "I know this is crazy," I'd said, sliding the private investigator's report across the table. "No," he'd replied, producing his own report on me. "This is survival. Crazy would be not checking." We'd laughed, then recognizing ourselves in each other's cautious approach. Love grew slowly, built on transparency that most would find invasive. We shared passwords, financial statements, medical records. What others might call paranoid, we called prudent. When trust has been weaponized against you, you rebuild it with different materials. Our relationship confused those who hadn't experienced betrayal trauma. Why did we need each other's therapy notes? Why the constant check-ins? Why the legally binding agreements about medical decisions? But other survivors understood. When your family tries to kill you, love requires verification. The support network had evolved into a national organization with chapters in every state. What began in my living room now occupied a building downtown, staffed by professionals and volunteers who understood guardianship abuse intimately. We'd helped free over 300 wrongfully committed individuals and prevented thousands more attempts. My role had shifted from desperate survivor to executive director, a position that required skills I'd never imagined needing. Public speaking, once impossible, when anxiety made my voice shake, became second nature. I testified before Congress 3 times, pushing for stronger federal oversight of guardianship proceedings. Each speech began the same way. "My name is Esther Matthews, and my parents tried to have me declared insane to steal my inheritance." The bluntness shocked legislators accustomed to euphemism, but sugarcoating attempted murder seemed pointless. Our advocacy had helped pass 7 federal laws and dozens of state regulations. The Guardian Angel Alert System, which flagged suspicious commitment attempts in real time, had become standard in hospitals nationwide. We'd changed how America viewed family and mental health, forcing recognition that sometimes those who claimed to help were actually hunting. Publishing my memoir had been Dr. Winter's suggestion, though writing it felt like performing surgery on myself. Every chapter required excavating wounds I'd rather leave buried. But the book, Blood Money: Surviving Family Predators, became essential reading for professionals dealing with guardianship cases. More importantly, it reached victims who didn't yet know they were being targeted. The letters poured in daily, children discovering parents' plots, elderly people recognizing warning signs, spouses seeing manipulation finally named. Each story broke my heart and reinforced our mission. We weren't just healing ourselves, we were preventing generational trauma from spreading. Jennifer had become my closest friend, bonded by more than shared experience. We'd stood as each other's maids of honor, creating new traditions for women whose families had forfeited the right to celebrate our milestones. Her wedding to Patricia, her lawyer-turned-love, had been beautiful in its defiance of traditional family structures. Survivors filled the venue, proof that chosen family could be stronger than blood. Not every survivor's story ended happily. We'd lost 12 members to suicide over the years, the weight of betrayal proving too heavy despite our support. Each death felt personal, a reminder that justice didn't automatically heal wounds. We created the Phoenix Protocol in response, mandatory check-ins for members showing warning signs, emergency response teams of survivors who'd talked others through dark nights. Marcus Chen had thrown himself into technology, creating apps that helped victims document abuse in real time. His innovations had provided evidence for hundreds of cases, but success couldn't fill the hole where trust in marriage once lived. He dated occasionally, but admitted feeling safer alone, his computer systems more reliable than human hearts. Carol Hendricks had rebuilt beautifully with her children, their relationship now stronger for having survived betrayal together. She'd written a book on family reconciliation after guardianship abuse, becoming the expert on a subject nobody should need to know. Her grace in forgiving children who'd been manipulated into betraying her inspired others facing similar divisions. My own healing journey had unexpected turns. Meditation, which I'd initially resisted as too vulnerable, became essential for managing hypervigilance. Gardening, which reminded me of grandmother Eleanor, provided grounding when anxiety spiraled. I'd even taken up boxing, channeling anger into controlled power rather than letting it eat me alive. The anniversary gatherings had become tradition survivors, meeting not to mourn, but to measure growth. This year's 5-year gathering filled an auditorium with over 500 attendees. Looking out at faces I'd come to know intimately, I saw my own journey reflected multiplied terror, transformed to strength isolation, evolved to community victims become advocates. 5 years ago, my parents tried to erase me. I began my speech. They failed. 5 years ago, your families tried to destroy you. They failed. Not because we were stronger than their evil, but because we found each other. Because silence broke and truth spoke. Because we refused to disappear quietly into institutions or graves. The standing ovation wasn't for my words, but for our collective survival. Each person clapping had faced family predators and lived to tell the tale. Some bore physical scars from forced medications or suicide attempts. All carried invisible wounds that would never fully heal. But we stood together, proof that betrayal didn't have to be the end of our stories. After the formal program, we gathered in small groups sharing victories and setbacks. A woman named Grace had just won her lawsuit, recovering $2 million stolen by her children. An elderly man named Francis had successfully protected himself from his nephew's commitment attempt using strategies we'd taught. Each success reinforced that our pain had purpose if it prevented others' suffering. Daniel found me during the reception, his presence still able to calm my nervous system after 3 years together. We decided against children unwilling to risk passing on whatever genetic component enabled such cruelty. Instead, we'd become uncle and aunt to dozens of survivor families' children, teaching them healthy boundaries and self-protection from earliest age. "You did good today," he said, simply knowing elaborate praise triggered my suspicion. "We all did good," I corrected, gesturing at the room full of survivors. 5 years ago, this was impossible. Now it's normal. Normal. Such a loaded word for those of us rebuilding lives outside typical family structures. Our normal included security protocols others found extreme. Our normal meant chosen family and verified trust. Our normal centered on healing from betrayal so profound it rewrote our DNA's assumptions about safety. But it was our normal hard-won and carefully constructed. That night, I sat in my garden under stars, thinking about the journey from that hotel room, where I'd hidden like prey to this moment of quiet strength. The healing wasn't complete, might never be complete. Triggers still ambushed me, a mother's concerned voice in public, siblings discussing inheritance, any mention of power of attorney. Yet I'd built a life worth living from the ashes of family destruction, found love despite trust being shattered, created family from fellow survivors, turned personal trauma into systemic change that protected thousands. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, still my bridge to the Matthews relatives who'd escaped prosecution. "Thinking of you today. Proud of who you've become despite everything." I didn't respond immediately, still navigating the complexity of maintaining any connection to that bloodline. But her consistency over 5 years, her own journey from enabler to advocate, had earned cautious appreciation. Perhaps some branches of a poison tree could grow healthy with enough pruning and care. The healing journey had no clear endpoint, no moment where trauma transformed entirely to triumph. Instead, it was daily choices to trust, despite fear, to love, despite betrayal, to build, despite destruction. Some days were harder than others. Some triggers still left me shaking. Some nights brought dreams where my parents succeeded, and I woke gasping for air that wasn't drugged. But more days were good now. More nights passed peacefully. More moments held joy untainted by hypervigilance. The woman who discovered her parents' betrayal 5 years ago would be amazed at this life-meaningful work, genuine love, chosen family, purpose, born from pain. I thought of grandmother Eleanor, often wondering what she'd think of how I'd used her inheritance, not for yachts or luxury, but for liberation, not for personal gain, but for collective healing. Her money had become a weapon against the very crimes that killed her sister, funding justice and prevention. "I hope I've made you proud," I whispered to the night sky, imagining her somewhere among the stars. "I hope I've become the woman you saw in me, even when you knew what my parents were." The garden rustled with evening breeze, and for a moment I could swear I smelled her perfume. Probably imagination trauma's gift of finding meaning in coincidence. But I chose to take it as approval, as blessing on this journey from prey to protector. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More survivors needing help, more predators requiring exposure, more systems demanding reform. The work would never end because family betrayal was as old as Cain and Abel, dressed in modern clothes, but ancient in cruelty. But tonight, surrounded by flowers and soil, I tended myself in a home, secured by my vigilance, loved by a man who understood my damage, supported by chosen family who'd walked through hell beside me. I felt something my parents had tried to steal forever. Peace. Not perfect peace. That was for people who'd never been hunted by their own blood. But real peace earned through battles, fought and won, strong enough to build a life on. The healing journey continued, would always continue. But I was no longer walking it alone, no longer victim but guide for others, finding their way from darkness. 5 years since betrayal tried to break me. A lifetime ahead to prove it had only revealed what I was made of Eleanor's steel, wrapped in survivor's wisdom, aimed at ensuring no family predator hunted unopposed again. The garden held tomorrow's growth in tonight's soil. I held tomorrow's healing in tonight's scars. Both would bloom in their seasoned beauty, from ashes strength, from survival, hope from the hardest journey anyone could walk the path, from family betrayal to chosen belonging. 10 years had transformed the landscape of guardianship abuse in America, and I'd had a front row seat to every victory and setback. The girl who'd once hidden in hotel rooms had evolved into a woman who testified before the Supreme Court, arguing for constitutional protection against predatory guardianship. But it was the quiet moments of individual salvation that reminded me why we fought. The call came on a Tuesday morning as I prepared for another congressional hearing. "Ms. Matthews, this is Deputy Morrison from Salem County. We have a situation. Young woman claims her parents are trying to commit her mentioned your name. Can you help?" Within hours, I was on a plane with our rapid response team. Amy Chen, different from our Marcus but carrying the same terrified expression I'd once worn, waited in the sheriff's protective custody. 23 years old, recent inheritor of her grandparents' tech fortune, surrounded by family members, insisting she needed immediate psychiatric intervention. "They started 6 months ago." Amy whispered, her hands shaking as she showed me documents. Little things at first. Concerned comments about my stress levels, suggestions I seemed tired. Then they hired a life coach who turned out to be a psychiatrist gathering evidence. I found their emails last week. They've already picked the facility. The pattern was textbook, but knowing that didn't make it less chilling. I activated our protocols: emergency legal representation, independent psychiatric evaluation, asset protection media documentation. Within 12 hours, Amy's parents faced federal investigators while she sat safely in our foundation's protective housing. "You saved my life," she said that evening, tears streaming down her face. "No," I corrected gently. "You saved your own life by recognizing the danger and calling for help. Never forget that. Your instincts protected you when your family wouldn't." Amy's case became the 100th successful intervention by our rapid response program. Each save felt like redemption balancing the cosmic scales for those we couldn't reach in time. But more importantly, Amy herself became proof that education worked. She'd recognized the warning signs because of our awareness campaigns, sought help because she knew it existed. The foundation had grown beyond my wildest imagination. The Eleanor Matthews Foundation for Guardian Justice occupied 3 floors of a downtown building, employed 50 full-time staff, and operated chapters in every state. Our annual budget exceeded $20 million, funded by survivors who'd recovered assets and donors, horrified by our mission's necessity. But growth brought challenges. Managing an organization this size while maintaining my own healing required constant balance. Daniel, now my husband of 7 years, helped navigate the complexity. His business acumen developed protecting his restaurants from his predatory ex-wife proved invaluable in foundation operations. "You're trying to save everyone," he observed one evening as I reviewed intervention requests. "But you're not responsible for every family predator in America." He was right, but knowing that didn't ease the weight. Every case file represented someone's terror isolation and betrayal by those who should protect them most. How could I prioritize when each deserved immediate help? The answer came through systematic change rather than individual heroics. We developed the Guardian Protocol, a standardized intervention process that could be implemented by trained volunteers nationwide. Like CPR for guardianship abuse, clear steps anyone could follow to provide emergency assistance. Training sessions filled constantly. Social workers, police officers, medical professionals, and survivors themselves learned to recognize warning signs and implement protective measures. We'd created what the network of predators had operated for decades, an infrastructure of response, but for protection rather than predation. The legal landscape had shifted dramatically. Eleanor's law, passed on the 5th anniversary of my parents' arrest, required federal oversight of all guardianship proceedings involving over $1 million in assets. The Matthews Registry tracked professionals involved in competency evaluations, flagging suspicious patterns. The Survivors Shield Act protected victims from retaliatory lawsuits by exposed predators. But legislation meant nothing without enforcement. We'd learned to work the system, maintaining relationships with key officials who ensured laws had teeth. Former Agent Fletcher, now retired, consulted for us, teaching others his investigative techniques. Ann Valdez, the prosecutor who'd convicted my parents, led our legal team after leaving government service. "We're building what should have existed all along," Ann said during a strategy meeting. "Basic protection for vulnerable people from those who claim to love them." The international expansion had begun 3 years earlier when a British survivor contacted us after reading my memoir. Sarah Pemberton's story echoed ours with distinctly English variations: tea poisonings instead of coffee countryside facilities, instead of suburban ones, but the same fundamental betrayal by blood relatives. Now we had affiliates in 12 countries, each adapting our methods to their legal systems. The predators had always been international. Finally, so were the protectors. Video conferences connected survivors across oceans, sharing strategies and strength. But it was a domestic case that challenged everything we'd built. The Richardsons appeared perfect concerned parents, seeking help for their allegedly bipolar son. They had documentation witnesses, even video evidence of erratic behavior. Our screeners initially approved their request for guidance in getting their son treatment. Jennifer's instincts saved us. Something about the father's phrasing triggered her radar, refined by years of detecting manipulation. Deeper investigation revealed an elaborate frame job. The son was a whistleblower about to expose his parents' corporate fraud. The bipolar episodes were staged reactions to drugs they'd slipped him. "They're evolving," Jennifer warned our team, "learning our methods and trying to use them against legitimate victims." We adapted, developing more sophisticated screening processes. But the incident reminded us that predators studied us as carefully as we studied them. The arms race between exploitation and protection would never end. Personal life had found its rhythm within the mission. Daniel and I had moved to a farmhouse outside the city, needing space from the intensity of urban survival. We discussed children again, ultimately deciding to foster teenagers aging out of care, young adults who needed stable support as they navigated independence. Our first foster daughter, Malik, had experienced her own family betrayal when relatives tried to steal her modest inheritance from deceased parents. She'd aged out of care before they could succeed, but carried the trauma of knowing extended family saw her as a resource rather than a person. "Is it weird that you collect damaged kids?" she'd asked one evening, her defensive sarcasm masking vulnerability. "We collect survivors," Daniel corrected gently. "People who've learned the hard way that family doesn't guarantee safety, but also learned that chosen connections can be stronger than blood." Malik thrived in our strange household where background checks were normal and trust was earned slowly. She'd started college studying social work with a focus on protecting vulnerable youth. Another survivor transformed into protector. The anniversary galas had become major events drawing hundreds of survivors and supporters. The 10th anniversary approached with special significance. A decade since my world shattered. A decade since betrayal launched a movement. A decade of transformation from victim to guardian of other victims. Jennifer and I planned the program together, reflecting on our journey from terrified women in a courthouse to leaders of a national organization. She'd married Patricia, had 2 children who grew up understanding that family required choice and commitment, not just DNA. Her brother remained in prison, his appeals exhausted his fortune, redistributed to his victims. "Do you ever forgive them?" she asked one evening as we reviewed speaker applications. "No," I answered honestly. "Forgiveness feels like absolving them and they don't deserve that. But I've released the hatred. It was poisoning me more than punishing them." She nodded, understanding the distinction. We'd all found our own balance between justice and bitterness, holding accountability without letting rage consume us. The gala's theme was Decade of Light, celebrating how we'd illuminated shadows where predators operated. Survivors would share stories of freedom, advocates would receive awards, and we'd announce the largest expansion, yet a residential program for victims needing long-term recovery support. The Phoenix House, built with a $10 million donation from William Chang, the tech entrepreneur we'd freed years earlier, would provide transitional housing for up to 50 survivors at a time. More than shelter, it would offer therapy, legal support, life skills training, everything needed to rebuild after family predation. "I spent 2 years wrongfully committed," William said at the groundbreaking. "This house ensures others won't lose more time than necessary to recovery. We're giving back what was stolen: safety, dignity, and hope." The night before the gala, I stood in my garden, now expanded to 2 acres of vegetables and flowers. Grandmother Eleanor's roses, transplanted from her estate before its sale, bloomed magnificently. I'd learned to splice and graft, creating new varieties from old stock. Appropriate metaphor for our work taking damaged stems and helping them grow into something beautiful. Daniel found me there holding 2 cups of tea, a ritual we'd developed for processing difficult days. We drank in companionable silence, watching fireflies dance among the flowers. "Proud of you," he said simply. "Proud of us," I corrected. "All of us. Every survivor who spoke truth, every advocate who fought back, every person who chose healing over hatred." Tomorrow, hundreds would gather to celebrate a decade of transformation. Media would cover our statistics: thousands saved millions, recovered laws, changed lives, rebuilt. But I thought about individuals: Amy Chen, starting graduate school; Malik choosing social work; William building sanctuaries; Jennifer raising children who'd never doubt their worth. My phone buzzed with a message from Emma, now serving on our foundation's board, after years of proving her commitment to redemption. Grandmother Eleanor would be so proud. You've built something magnificent from ashes. Perhaps she would be proud. I'd taken her inheritance and multiplied it not in dollars but in lives saved. The money she'd protected had become protection itself, spreading far beyond what she could have imagined. The new purpose born from betrayal had consumed a decade, but felt like a beginning. Predators still existed, would always exist. But now they faced opposition. Now victims had voices. Now survivors had support. The infrastructure of exploitation that my parents had accessed so easily met equal infrastructure of protection. 10 years ago, I'd stood frozen in a doorway watching my parents destroy my life. Tomorrow I'd stand before hundreds whose lives had been saved because that destruction forged something stronger. Not a happy ending. Those were fairy tales. But a purposeful continuation, meaning wrestled from chaos beauty, from ashes. The garden held tomorrow's growth in tonight's soil. The foundation held tomorrow's saves in tonight's preparation. And I held tomorrow's strength in today's scars, proof that survival could become service, that pain could transform to purpose, that the worst betrayal could birth the fiercest protection. 10 years of fighting family predators, a lifetime ahead of ensuring no one fought alone. The new purpose had become my identity, my mission, my redemption for surviving when others hadn't. In the distance, a siren wailed. Another emergency, another crisis, another family tearing itself apart over money and power. Once that sound would have triggered panic, remembering my own desperate flight from predatory parents. Now it summoned resolve. Somewhere someone needed what we'd built. Tomorrow we'd be there. Tonight, surrounded by growing things in soil, I'd tended loved by a man who understood survival, supported by chosen family, forged in shared trauma. I felt the truth that had taken a decade to fully grasp. They'd tried to destroy me to steal my inheritance. Instead, they'd created someone who inherited the earth, not in wealth, but in purpose connection and the unshakable determination that no family predator would hunt unopposed while I drew breath. The new purpose was no longer new but essential as breathing, and like breath, it would continue until it couldn't each inhale, bringing strength to fight each exhale, releasing another survivor into freedom. Tomorrow would bring the gala, the celebration, the marking of time, but tonight brought quiet satisfaction of purpose fulfilled and continuing. The girl who'd hidden had become the woman who protected. That transformation was worth more than any inheritance they'd tried to steal. The call came at 3 a.m, jerking me from sleep with the urgency that only middle-of-the-night phones can bring. Daniel stirred beside me as I answered, instantly alert to potential crisis. Ms. Matthews, this is Detective Sarah Palmer from Hartford PD. We have a situation. A young woman barricaded in her apartment says her parents are coming to commit her in the morning. She's got documents recordings, and she's asking for you specifically. The address was 4 hours away, but I was dressed and in the car within 15 minutes. Daniel kissed me goodbye with the practiced ease of someone who'd grown accustomed to emergency departures. Save her, he said simply. I'll handle the gala preparations. The 10th anniversary gala would proceed without me if necessary. This was why we'd built everything. For moments like this when someone desperately needed what we'd learned through blood and betrayal. During the drive, Detective Palmer briefed me via phone. The young woman, Stephanie Morris, was 25, had inherited her late aunt's estate 6 months ago. Her parents had been concerned about her mental state, ever since culminating in their announcement that Dr. Harrison, a different one but the name made my blood chill, would evaluate her at 9 a.m. She's got everything Palmer said. Recordings of them discussing which facility pays kickbacks, emails with forged medical histories, bank statements showing large cash withdrawals corresponding to bribes. It's like she studied your playbook. She had. Stephanie had read my book, followed our website, implemented every protective strategy we'd published. When her parents began their campaign, she'd recognized it immediately and started documenting everything. The student had become the teacher, using our hard-won knowledge to protect herself. I arrived at dawn to find a scene painfully familiar: parents performing concern for gathered authorities. A doctor, with suspicious credentials, papers claiming emergency intervention was necessary. But this time, the intended victim wasn't alone, confused, or defenseless. Stephanie had turned her apartment into a fortress of evidence. Every wall displayed printed emails, recorded conversations played on loop. Security footage showed her parents planting drugs during visits. She'd created a museum of their conspiracy, impossible to dismiss as paranoia. "Ms. Matthews," she said when I entered, her voice steady despite exhaustion. "Thank you for coming. I knew you'd understand." I did understand. The hypervigilance, the obsessive documentation, the desperate need for someone to believe truth over performance. But more importantly, I understood we'd already won. The authorities were listening to her, not her parents. The doctor was being questioned about his credentials. The intended victim had become the prosecution's star witness. By noon, Stephanie's parents were in custody, their conspiracy unraveling with the speed of all poorly constructed lies. The network they'd hired was amateur hour compared to what my parents had accessed, a cheap imitation of the original predators, easily exposed by anyone who knew the warning signs. "You did everything right," I told Stephanie as crime scene techs processed her evidence wall. "You recognized the threat, documented everything, and called for help. You saved yourself." She broke down then, months of fear and vigilance finally releasing. "They're my parents. How could they?" "Because some people see family as property, not people," I said, holding her as she sobbed. "Their failure to love you properly isn't your fault, it's theirs." We spent the day ensuring her safety restraining orders, asset protection, emergency housing. Our rapid response team had this down to a science, now each member knowing their role. Legal arrived within hours. Psychiatric evaluation confirmed her mental stability, financial forensics traced every attempted theft. But it was the personal support that mattered most. Jennifer arrived by evening, bringing other survivors from nearby chapters. We surrounded Stephanie with people who understood who'd walked this path, who proved survival and thriving were possible. "The first days are the worst," Carol Hendricks told her gently, "when the adrenaline fades and reality hits. But we'll be here. You're not alone anymore." That night, in a secure hotel room, Stephanie asked the question every survivor eventually voiced. Why didn't they just ask if they needed money? I would have helped. Why this elaborate cruelty? "Because it was never about money," Jennifer answered. "It was about power, control, the belief that they owned you and therefore owned everything that was yours. Asking would have acknowledged your autonomy. Predators can't do that." I thought about my own parents serving life sentences, but probably still convinced they'd done nothing wrong. 10 years hadn't brought remorse from them, only rage at being caught. Catherine's letters from prison, which I'd stopped reading after the first few, blamed everyone but herself. Robert had died 3 years into his sentence, shanked by another inmate he'd tried to con. The gala proceeded the next evening with me racing back just in time for the keynote. Daniel had handled everything perfectly, understanding that saving Stephanie was more important than any ceremony. The ballroom was packed with survivors, advocates, politicians, and media, all gathered to mark a decade of transformation. But I rewrote my speech in those final moments, inspired by the morning's rescue. 10 years ago, I discovered my parents were predators. I began standing before 500 people who'd become family. I survived because others had survived before me, leaving breadcrumbs of truth for me to follow. This morning, I watched a young woman save herself using knowledge we've shared freely. She's here tonight, proof that our pain has become prevention, our trauma transformed to teaching. The spotlight found Stephanie sitting between Jennifer and Carol, still processing her new reality, but no longer alone. The applause that erupted wasn't just for her, but for the system we'd built that made her self-rescue possible. The evening celebrated victories: 3,700 successful interventions, 460 million in recovered assets, guardian protection laws in all 50 states. We honored advocates, recognized donors, unveiled plans for 3 more Phoenix houses. But the real celebration was simpler: we existed, thrived, protected others. Amy Chen, the young woman whose case had been our 100th save, took the stage to announce she was starting law school specializing in elder law and guardian advocacy. 5 years ago, Esther Matthews saved my life. Now I'm dedicating mine to saving others. That's how we break the cycle: survivors becoming protectors. The pattern repeated throughout the evening: saved becoming savers, victims becoming victors. The network of predators had operated through corruption and secrecy. Our network operated through transparency and truth, each success story inspiring others to fight back. During the reception, I found myself in conversation with a senator who'd initially opposed our legislation. "I thought you were exaggerating," he admitted. "Family members trying to kill each other for money seem like fiction. Then my brother tried to have me committed last year. If your foundation hadn't existed..." Even those in power weren't immune. Predators existed at every level of society in every type of family. But now they faced exposure, prosecution, and prevention. The shadows where they'd operated had been illuminated by survivor voices refusing to be silenced. Malik, our former foster daughter, now a licensed social worker, pulled me aside during dessert. "I'm opening my own practice," she announced, "specializing in family betrayal trauma. You showed me that survival could become service. Time to pay it forward." Another full circle. Another survivor transformed into protector. The multiplication effect of healing shared rather than hoarded. As the evening wound down, I stood with my chosen family: Daniel steadfast and understanding, Jennifer brilliant and brave, Carol graceful and wise, Marcus innovative and determined. We'd all been broken by family betrayal. We'd all rebuilt into something stronger. "Think Eleanor knew this would happen?" Jennifer asked, gesturing at the room full of survivors and advocates. "That her inheritance would become this..." I thought about my grandmother, who'd seen through my parents but couldn't stop them directly, who'd prepared me for battle while pretending everything was normal, who'd left not just money, but evidence, truth, and the seeds of justice. "I think she hoped," I said, finally. "She couldn't save her sister Margaret, but she made sure I could save myself, and through saving myself, save others." The final speaker was someone I hadn't expected: Emma, my cousin, who'd chosen redemption over denial. She'd spent 10 years proving her commitment to justice, serving on our board, donating her own inheritance to the cause, testifying against family members who continued their predatory ways. "Family isn't blood," she said, voice strong despite visible emotion. "Family is choice, daily choice to protect, rather than prey, support, rather than steal, love, rather than lie. The Matthews name was poisoned by those who came before us. But we," she gestured to the room, "have chosen to create new family, one that guards rather than gaslights, advocates rather than abuses." Her words sparked the evening's most powerful moment. Survivors throughout the room began standing, stating their names and relationships. Jennifer Walsh, sister by survival. Marcus Chen, brother by choice. Carol Hendricks, mother to all who need one. On and on, voices claiming kinship through shared experience, rather than shared DNA. When my turn came, I stood slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. Esther Matthews, granddaughter of Eleanor, daughter of Predator's sister, to every survivor, guardian of those still fighting. Family by choice, by battle, by determination, that no one fights alone. The room erupted in applause, but more importantly, in tears of recognition. We'd redefined family itself, stripping it of automatic trust and rebuilding it on proven loyalty. Blood might be thicker than water, but survivor bonds were thicker than both. The evening ended with candles lit for those we'd lost, those still trapped, those yet to realize they needed help, but also for those we'd saved, those still fighting those who'd find us tomorrow or next year when they needed us most. As Daniel and I drove home through darkness lit by stars, I reflected on the journey from that terrifying morning to this triumphant night. 10 years of fighting, healing, building. 10 years of transforming personal trauma into collective strength. "No regrets?" Daniel asked, knowing my tendency toward midnight introspection. I thought about it seriously. Regret for trusting parents who'd proven untrustworthy? No. That trust had been child's innocence, not adult foolishness. Regret for the pain endured? No. It had forged strength I'd never have found otherwise. Regret for the family lost? No. I'd gained a larger chosen family that actually protected its members. "No regrets," I said finally. "Only gratitude. They tried to destroy me and created someone who destroys predators instead. That's not tragedy. That's transformation." We arrived home to find Stephanie sleeping on our couch, having followed us after the gala, rather than staying alone in the hotel. Another survivor seeking the comfort of those who understood. I covered her with a blanket, remembering my own first nights of freedom, desperate for safety that wasn't solitary. In the garden, Grandmother Eleanor's roses bloomed, despite the late season, their persistence matching our own. I picked one, breathing its fragrance, thinking about legacy and love, betrayal, and belonging. Inside our home was full Stephanie on the couch, Malik visiting for the weekend, 2 new foster teens, adjusting to stability. The family my parents had tried to prevent me from having by stealing my sanity and inheritance. Instead, their betrayal had created capacity for larger love, deeper connections, chosen bonds that predation couldn't break. I thought one last time about Amy Chen from the morning, already texting with Jennifer about joining our local chapter. Another save becoming saver, another story added to our collection, another proof that survival was possible, that predators weren't invincible, that family could be reimagined and rebuilt on foundations of choice rather than chance. 10 years since betrayal, a lifetime ahead of belonging. The full circle wasn't ending where it began. It was spiraling outward, encompassing more survivors, more protectors, more chosen family with each revolution. My parents had tried to close my circle, make it small enough to control and consume. Instead, they'd broken it wide open, creating space for everyone who needed shelter from family storms. Tomorrow would bring new crises, new calls, new conspiracies to unravel, but also new saves, new survivors, new circles of protection, expanding outward like ripples from stones thrown in still water. Tonight brought satisfaction of promises kept to Grandmother Eleanor, that her inheritance would serve justice, to Aunt Margaret that her death wouldn't be forgotten, to every survivor that they wouldn't fight alone, to myself that surviving would mean more than just breathing. The girl who'd stood frozen in Dr. Harrison's doorway was gone, replaced by a woman who'd made doorways into escape routes for others. That transformation was the greatest inheritance of all. Not money, but meaning. Not wealth, but purpose. Not blood family, but chosen bonds stronger than any predator could break. 10 years of full circles, each wider than the last, and we were just getting started. If this story resonated with you, if you recognized warning signs in your own family dynamics, know that you're not alone. Trust your instincts. Document everything. Seek help before crisis hits. Have you ever witnessed family members prioritizing money over relationships? What warning signs do you think people should watch for? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found value in Esther's journey from victim to protector, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories of survival and triumph. Share it with anyone who might need to hear that family betrayal can be survived, that predators can be stopped, that chosen family can heal wounds, blood family created. Thank you for listening to this story of transformation. May you always trust your instincts, protect your autonomy, and remember that real family, whether born or chosen, multiplies joy and divides sorrow, never the reverse. Until next time, Stay strong, stay aware, and stay connected to those who truly value you for who you are, not what you have.